Hello and welcome. I'm Tom Burges Watson. You are watching W News, broadcasting live from the Arabiya News headquarters. These are our top stories. Just 5 days to go until the US presidential election, and both candidates are heading west. Harris to Las Vegas for a rally alongside Jennifer Lopez. Trump is heading to Arizona for an interview with Tucker Carlson. Catastrophic flooding in Spain has claimed the lives of at least 158 people. The country's Prime Minister is urging people to stay home during the rescue efforts. And the Lebanese caretaker Prime Minister Najib Mikati says Israel and Hezbollah could be set to agree on a ceasefire within the coming days. Hello and welcome. We're just 5 days away from the day when Americans will head to the polls in one of the tightest presidential elections in recent memory. Donald Trump and Kamala Harris remain neck and neck in the polls, and both candidates are heading west today. Harris is holding a rally in Las Vegas, where Jennifer Lopez is due to make an appearance. Donald Trump is heading to Glendale, Arizona for a live podcast-style interview with the former Fox News host Tucker Carlson. Well, Michigan is a key swing state, narrowly voted for Joe Biden by around 150,000 votes in the 2020 election. But growing dissatisfaction with his administration's Gaza policy amongst the state's 210,000 Arab Americans is prompting Democrats to engage more with this vital community. Will Kamala Harris address their concerns? Well, for more, I'm joined by our chief correspondent in D.C., Simon Marks. Simon, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Just tell us what we can expect from both campaign teams today.
Well, they're literally Donald Trump and Kamala Harris following in each other's footsteps today, Tom, which gives you a sense again, and we've said this every day over the last few days, that this election is going to be won or lost in those 7 critical battleground states that these two candidates continue to barnstorm. So today, for both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, it is all about Arizona, it is all about Nevada, and it is all about star power. As you said, Jennifer Lopez is going to be campaigning with Kamala Harris today. Tomorrow, Cardi B has announced that she will be campaigning with Kamala Harris. And Donald Trump will be sitting down with Tucker Carlson, one of the stars of the Make America Great Again movement. The former Fox News host will interview Donald Trump. It's clearly going to be a very, very sympathetic interview because Tucker Carlson has been a permanent fixture on Donald Trump's campaign over the course of the last several weeks and has made several speeches at various Trump rallies, including the one that was held at Madison Square Garden on Sunday in New York, in support of the former president. There is even a suggestion among some observers here that Tucker Carlson might be a possible future White House press secretary in the event that Donald Trump secures the presidency. This, of course, is all about getting the vote out by both candidates, trying to galvanize supporters. And in that regard, Democrats say today that they like some of the numbers that they're seeing from early voting that is taking place in many of these battleground states, where so far more of the early voters have been women and there have been fewer men so far participating in early voting. And Kamala Harris believes that there is a gender gap here, that women are more likely to support her than Donald Trump, and that men are more likely to support Donald Trump than Kamala Harris. So they're extrapolating from all of that a sense that they are currently in the lead. But you've got to be very, very careful with all of these early voting figures because they really don't tell us very much beyond the numbers of people that have voted and what kind of voters they are, registered Democrats, registered Republicans, or independents. But the barnstorming of the battleground states set to continue today in Arizona and Nevada.
OK, and we've heard from Bill Clinton, who's been adding his voice specifically on the issue of the conflict in Gaza. I'm just wondering how that went down.
Yeah, well, it went down with controversy, as you might expect. Bill Clinton campaigning in Michigan yesterday, joining a growing number of leading Democrats who are saying to supporters in Michigan, you might have a problem with Kamala Harris and Joe Biden's handling of the situation in Gaza, but don't let that result in you sitting this election out or deciding that you should vote for another candidate. Bill Clinton made his argument based on his version of history in the Middle East that was then immediately rejected on social media by some activists in Michigan who insisted that he had misstated the reality of history in the Middle East, and who insisted on social media that they were going to double down and withhold their support from Kamala Harris. There is a movement in Michigan called Abandon Harris 2024 that is encouraging people not to vote for Donald Trump, but to vote for a third-party candidate, Jill Stein of the Green Party. And the Democrats are so worried about the number of grassroots supporters there that might ignore the advice of Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, within the last 24 hours, Senator Bernie Sanders, and may still choose not to back Kamala Harris, that they've actually now created an advertisement that is airing on television and being targeted digitally at Michigan voters in a bid to try to persuade them, as the ad puts it, that a vote for Jill Stein is a vote for Donald Trump. So it's a worry for Kamala Harris, and it's going to be a worry for her all the way through until election night, when the actual results start coming in from Michigan.
And Simon, all the while, I think we can call it garbage gate, can't we? It's rumbling on, and it seems that Donald Trump and his team have managed to spin this one rather firmly to their advantage, haven't they?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, again, we're not going to know until we see some actual votes being actually counted. Let's just spin back to last Sunday, when garbage became the word of the week in this American presidential election campaign, resulting from a comedian making a racist joke during the warm-up act ahead of Donald Trump's appearance at Madison Square Garden, saying that there was a floating island of garbage in the ocean and it was called Puerto Rico. That caused uproar among the Latino and Hispanic community, particularly among Puerto Ricans. Seemed to be a potential problem for Donald Trump, still does, in states like Pennsylvania, where there are 500,000 Puerto Ricans who are voters. Joe Biden then delivered Donald Trump a gift by saying that the only floating garbage that he could see out there were Trump's supporters. And in the last 24 hours, Donald Trump has absolutely taken this on the front foot. He clambered aboard a garbage truck yesterday, drove around in circles for a while and answered reporters' questions, clad in a high-vis jacket of the type that refuse workers in the United States commonly wear. He made a series of comments in rally speeches insisting that it's disgraceful for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to dismiss his supporters as garbage, and said that it lifted the lid on the way in which they actually feel about half the American population. So he's continuing to try and deflect attention away from the beginning of all of this, which was that crude joke made in New York on Sunday, and putting it back on Kamala Harris. She has distanced herself from Joe Biden's comments, but whether garbage continues to be the word of the week all the way through until Friday night here, I think is unclear, but certainly in the climax of a very unedifying presidential election campaign here, it is notable that garbage is the watchword on the lips of both candidates.
OK, well, thank you very much indeed for that update. From DC, our chief correspondent, Simon Marks. Thank you very much indeed. Well, the US election's obsession with the word garbage is continuing, with Donald Trump using it at every opportunity to score political points in the final race to the White House. Well, it's still unclear if President Joe Biden meant to call all Republican voters garbage during a Tuesday night call with supporters. But Trump has capitalized on the comments as his rival Kamala Harris tries to turn the page and focus on election issues like the economy. Our very own Nick Harper filed this report from Washington.
Donald Trump wants a new job, just not necessarily this one. On Wednesday in Wisconsin, he dressed up as a garbage man.
How do you like my garbage truck?
For an impromptu press conference from the cab of a truck to attack Joe Biden's Tuesday night comments where he appeared to call Trump voters garbage.
Joe Biden should be ashamed of himself if he knows what he's even doing.
The orange vest stayed on for his rally in Wisconsin, where he switched the attacks to his rival in the race, Kamala Harris.
For the past 9 years, Kamala and her party have called us racists, bigots, fascists, deplorables, irredeemables, Nazis, and they called me Hitler.
He blasted the vice president on immigration, the economy, and for running a campaign of hate, despite plenty of disparaging, divisive remarks of his own. Meanwhile, on Wednesday, Harris hit 3 cities in 3 swing states, lashing out at Trump in Pennsylvania.
This is someone who is unstable, obsessed with revenge, consumed with grievance, and out for unchecked power.
Before encouraging voters in Wisconsin to back her vision for the future.
I pledge to seek common ground and common sense solutions to the challenges you face. I am not looking to score political points. I am looking to make progress.
Meanwhile, tech billionaire and Trump supporter Elon Musk faces a court hearing for his $1 million daily giveaway. Pennsylvania's district attorney has sued Musk for interference with the integrity of elections, accusing him of paying people to vote for the former president. Another day of battleground campaigning today, with both Trump and Harris travelling to Nevada and Arizona. And they're laying out plans for their final rallies ahead of Tuesday's election day. Trump's campaign is leaning towards Michigan for his Monday night event, while Harris is expected to choose Pennsylvania, revealing their hands for which state they feel may win or lose them this election. Nick Harper, Al Arabiya News, Washington.
Let's take a quick look now at the polls. Kamala Harris holds a narrow lead in Michigan and Wisconsin, and while she and Trump both seem to be tied in Pennsylvania. Well, nationally, a recent YouGov survey shows Harris with 47%. That compares to Donald Trump with 46%. Well, for more on this, so we can cross to Washington and speak to Amy Dacey, who is the former CEO of the Democratic National Committee. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Amy. Just looking at the polls there, I mean, incredibly tight. I mean, far too close to call, isn't it, for the time being?
Yes, I mean, the polls have it as very tight. I don't think that's been unexpected. It's been that way for quite some time. But just a reminder, these polls are a snapshot in time. We've already had close to 50 million people vote in this election already. And so each campaign is trying to have their final message in the final days. The only poll that matters is the one when the votes are counted on November 5th, for sure.
For sure. Now, let's talk about what the candidates are up to. Kamala Harris is in Las Vegas today. Along with her is going to be Jennifer Lopez, who is, of course, Puerto Rican origin. That in itself is a message, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, I think that definitely both campaigns are trying to utilize surrogates to try and reach communities that they want to certainly connect with, ask for their vote, get them to motivate and vote on Election Day. I think recent statements have just kind of shown that some of the surrogates in these communities really matter. And definitely, Kamala Harris, as the candidate, wants to have people around her. But again, they help with enthusiasm. They help to show support. But it's really the candidates asking directly to these voters for their vote that will matter.
Of course, we've heard plenty of people using this word garbage in recent days. It seems it won't go away. A bit of an own goal by President Joe Biden, would you say?
Well, listen, I think the bottom line is you see, Donald Trump latching onto the theatrics around a statement that, certainly President Biden's tried to clarify. Vice President Harris made it very clear her position on that. And yet you still haven't heard former President Trump denounce any of the comments that were made at his Madison Square Garden, rally. So he's into theatrics. He's not into substance. I think it would be better for him to be out talking about his policies. I think a lot of his strategists feel the same way, but he'd rather be driving around in a garbage truck and trying to distract from the real issues that people care about.
Nevertheless, as we just saw in that poll, roughly half of the US electorate still intends to vote for him, or roughly half, I said. So, what is it about Donald Trump? Why the enduring appeal? Do you think it's his persona, or do you think there's a perceived failure on the part of the Democrats to deliver on issues that are important to people?
Well, I still think we're in a very polarized, country. I think that what we have found always in studies is that party affiliation is the most, strongest identifier as why people vote in a certain way. I think there's definitely some people who, feel strongly that, they want to support the president. I think, he's out there, with a lot of misinformation, unfortunately, to talk to these voters. But because you see that polarization not only in the presidential race, but this is why our Senate and our House is so close, why you see state chambers, legislative chambers across the country with very narrow margins. It's very polarized around both parties. And so I think that is really a clear indicator in some of these polls as well, how we're breaking down with parties and why these independent swing voters, undecided voters matter so much in these elections.
One of the things we heard from Donald Trump in the last 24 hours is he said he was going to protect women, quote, whether they like it or not. What do you read into that?
Well, I certainly don't think as a woman, I find that very reassuring. I think he knows that he has a problem in the gender gap with women voters. I think that, he's misrepresenting, his policies when it comes to women. I mean, this is the same man who definitely celebrated and acknowledged that he was the key component for breaking down Roe v. Wade and having that overturned. So he can say he's for women. He can even say it in ways that might not resonate well with women. But I do think you will see women voters listening to what is in their best interest, where it comes with, whether it's abortion rights, whether it's the economy, whether it's safety and security. And so, he can say this rhetoric to women voters, but I don't know if it'll matter to them at the polls. Now, no group is a monolith. There are certainly, some women that will be supporting him, but I think statements like that don't help him with those undecided women in states like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan.
You mentioned the economy there, usually the top concern amongst voters. And when you look at all the indicators, they're pretty good looking from the outside in. You've got unemployment just around the 4% mark, inflation's been brought down, and yet people still feel aggrieved, particularly about the cost of living. What's Kamala Harris doing and saying to address people's concerns on that particular issue?
Well, I think, first of all, she's acknowledging that there's some anxiety in the electorate. I think she's acknowledging that not everything was accomplished during, Biden's first administration, and there are things to do. That's why she wants to look forward with her policies. She's been very specific where you haven't seen that come out of the Trump-Vance ticket. We're talking about housing costs and trying to make sure that housing is more affordable. Recently talking about using Medicare as an opportunity to help people who need to take care of their aging and elderly parents. They're talking about, things about living wages. They're talking about things that will really, paid medical leave. They're talking about childcare. These are issues that will affect those checkbook issues, those, sitting around the dining room table, making decisions. College affordability, of course, has always been big. So these are really specific policy areas that I think this Harris-Walz ticket says they want to make a difference. Really doesn't resonate, with the rhetoric that's happening, out of the Trump-Vance ticket, where there's really not a vision. Even when pushed on his policy issues, I think you hear that ticket say they haven't formulated a plan, they're getting there. That's not really reassuring to people who want to know what are the things you can do to me to make, do for me to make my life better going forward.
But nevertheless, a poll I looked at in the New York Times points to the fact that 52% of voters trust Donald Trump on the economy. That compares to 45% for Harris. So what is it about Donald Trump and how he's playing his cards that he's perceived as being more trustworthy on this extremely important issue?
Well, I think he's saying less and certainly meaning, less as well. I think that, just saying that you're going to make, things were better under me. I think he's looking back. Things did cost differently. We also have to remember that this is somebody who was president of the United States for 4 years, and things were not great under that administration. He suffered, terribly during a global pandemic where his policies and, his leadership failed us. There were certainly economic indicators during those 4 years that were not beneficial to people. So I think that this just saying, you're ready to make America better or feel better. There's 4 years that show that he's not capable of doing that. So I think the campaign, the Democratic campaign's out there trying to make sure people understand the difference and what 4 more years of Trump would look like. But you have to remind people of what it actually was like under a Trump presidency.
OK, well, we're going to leave it there. Really appreciate you taking the time. We'll, of course, speak to you at some stage very soon. Thank you very much indeed, Amy Dacey. We are keeping a close eye on developments in the United States. We will, of course, be bringing you the latest from the US elections. We're also keeping a very close eye on opinion polls, where it appears the two candidates are neck and neck in the polls. A very tight race. Let's get a brief check of some other news stories we're following for you now. The Foreign Minister of Saudi Arabia has reiterated that the kingdom will not normalise ties with Israel without a Palestinian state. That comment was made by Prince Faisal bin Farhan at the Future Investment Initiative, where he slammed Israel for devaluating Palestinian lives. Well, an estimated 43,000 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza during the course of these past 12 months. North Korea has conducted its longest ICBM test yet, using what it's calling the world's most powerful strategic weapon. Well, the Hermit Kingdom's leader, Kim Jong-un, said the test was a warning to enemies that have been threatening the country's security. Well, the US and South Korea held high-level talks as a result of that move. Well, the Kremlin is declining to comment on whether or not Russia is helping North Korea develop its military technology. Russia, meanwhile, says it is set to sign a treaty with Iran. Moscow's top diplomat, Sergei Lavrov, says that the treaty would strengthen ties between the two countries and include closer cooperation in the field of defense. Russia says it expects Iran's president, Masoud Pezeshkian, to visit Moscow before the end of next year. Some sports stories we're following for you now. The São Paulo Grand Prix on Sunday is going to be the 41st World Championship Grand Prix at Interlagos. Well, Brazil first hosted this race at Interlagos in 1973. Well, the Formula One leader Max Verstappen will take a grid penalty at São Paulo Grand Prix after bringing in another new engine. Well, the three-time defending F1 world champion will introduce a sixth internal combustion engine this year. Well, only 4 are permitted before penalties are incurred. Some golf news for you now. Richard T. Lee has set the early pace at the Asian Tour's Indonesian Masters today, firing a 10 under par 62 to surge into the lead after the first round. Well, the Canadian rattled off 2 eagles and 7 birdies to go clear at the top of the leaderboard. Well, Lee finished in the top 10 in the past 3 Asia Tour events, and earlier this year secured a 3rd place at the GS Caltex Maekyong Open. To basketball news now. The Cavs gave the Los Angeles Lakers a rough ride despite a warm reception for Bronny James in Cleveland, where the hosts dominated in a 134-110 victory to improve to 5-0. Well, the game was billed as a homecoming for LeBron and Bronny James. That made them the first father-son duo to play alongside each other in an NBA game. 20-year-old Bronny was drafted by the Lakers in June and is expected to be headed to the developmental G League very soon. Rugby news now. England head coach Steve Borthwick has issued a rallying cry to his players ahead of the start of the Autumn Nations Series campaign. England will play against New Zealand at the Allianz Stadium in Twickenham on Saturday. England also face Australia, South Africa and Japan. Well, 2 of Borthwick's team members were defeated against the All Blacks on their summer tour of New Zealand, which followed the World Cup semi-finals last year. Turning now to events in the Middle East. The Hezbollah-Israel conflict may soon come to an end. The US envoy Amos Hochstein indicated to the Lebanese Prime Minister Najib Mikati that a ceasefire in the war could be possible before the US elections on the 5th of November. Well, the Prime Minister of Lebanon condemned Israeli threats that lead to civilian evacuation and displacement as a war crime, calling on international entities to pressure Israel. Well, despite this, he expressed hope for a ceasefire deal as Israel's public broadcaster reported a draft agreement for an initial 60-day truce. Well, for more on all the latest developments around the ceasefire proposals, I can speak to The Economist's Middle East correspondent Gareth Brown, who joins us from Beirut. Gareth, great to have you with us. We've heard the Lebanese Prime Minister, Najib Mikati, expressing optimism about this ceasefire, possibly in the coming hours or days. Where do you think this sense of optimism comes from?
Well, that's the question that everyone has on their mind here in Beirut. I think it's it's not quite clear. Obviously, we've had some high-level US visitors to Beirut in the last day or two. And there's definitely a spring in Prime Minister Mikati's step, talking about a possible ceasefire within hours. But I have to be honest, I think the excitement, around a possible deal has really been extinguished in the last few hours. Amos Hochstein, who's, a key figure in the US negotiation between Hezbollah and Israel, was slated to come back to Beirut in the next day or two. And I understand that's now been cancelled and he'll head back to Washington. And, once news of this possible ceasefire broke in the Lebanese media, there was quite a fierce backlash, not just from Hezbollah and Hezbollah-affiliated media, but, from across the political spectrum. I think there are parts of this draft deal which was leaked to Israeli media, in the last few days, which I think many Lebanese, not just Hezbollah, would find unacceptable. And to a degree, the deal that we've seen would give Israel essentially, the ability to strike when and where it wanted to inside Lebanon. And I think, if you read the media here, the parts of the media which are traditionally supportive or representative of Hezbollah, there's some very, very unpalatable things in there. So we have to wait and see. Is there going to be another visit by a US envoy to Beirut? But it seems at the moment like Prime Minister Mikati might have got a bit too excited and spoken too soon.
In terms of what we've been hearing from Hezbollah, of course, they've got that long-standing condition that a ceasefire is conditional upon a ceasefire in Gaza. I mean, do you think there's any chance they're going to drop that condition?
Seems unlikely. It would be quite a U-turn. This was something that, Hezbollah had said, but even Nasrallah himself had said repeatedly in speeches throughout the past year. And, in the last speech before he was killed, it was something he reiterated. It would be very difficult for Naim Qassem, who, was recently announced as the new leader of Hezbollah, to make an absolute U-turn. However, there might be room for a sort of fudge, if you like, a downgrading of the war in Gaza, which the Israelis could interpret as the war in Gaza not being over, but would be a significant enough reduction in hostilities, is something that could possibly be spun by Hezbollah as something akin to a ceasefire. I think there's a lot of optimism, shall we say, hope, not only in Israel, but also in America, that this can be broken. Hezbollah is in a far weaker negotiating position now than it was a few months ago. We've seen this devastating wave of assassinations, the pager attack. But so far, there's nothing concrete that suggests that red line has changed for Hezbollah.
Let's just talk about what's been happening on the ground in Lebanon. The historical site of Balbec has been very much in the headlines. A lot of people wondering, why is that particular region in the sights of Israel? What are people saying about that?
I mean, it's interesting, everything that's happened in Balbec. Of course, it's an ancient historical site, but it's also, one of the biggest cities in Lebanon, that eastern region. It really is the kind of jewel in the Bekaa Valley. Now, the Bekaa Valley has this long border with Syria, and it's really a key territory for Hezbollah in terms of bringing in weapons and support from Syria. It could be seen as the sort of territory within Lebanon which connects the axis of resistance, if you like, and control and free movement in the Bekaa Valley, in which Balbec sits, is essential to Hezbollah's ability to resupply, to act in Syria, to act in Iran, to bring in, whether it's personnel, whatever, all the way from Iran. So this is a key territory. It's not in the south. It's not on the border with Israel. But Balbec is central to Hezbollah's operations, not just on the battlefield, but in controlling Lebanon. And I think if you listen to what, international diplomats are saying, whether it's the Americans, the French, You know, the Israeli focus now on Balbec and the Bekaa Valley is about stopping Hezbollah's supply, so that if this war was to stop tomorrow or in a week or in 3 months' time, Hezbollah won't be able to reconstitute itself in the coming months, years, you know, to essentially rebuild all the damage that's been done by Israel. So it's not on the front lines, it's not on the border with Israel, but it's very, very important to Hezbollah's strength.
Indeed, and it's also extremely close to Syria, about like just 20 or 30 kilometers away from Syria. And I'm just wondering if people think that's significant in this equation, as you say, in terms of restocking Hezbollah's supplies.
That is the purpose. You know, the utility of Balbec and the Bekaa Valley is to Hezbollah being resupplied, and without that area, without control of Balbec, they're isolated in southern Lebanon. They become a far easier target for Israel. I think it's also important because it demonstrates an expanding and a widening of Israel's campaign. You know, these evacuation orders which came out, you know, from the IDF's Arabic spokesperson in the last few days. That's the first time that the IDF has ordered the evacuation of a whole city in Lebanon. So that's unprecedented, you know, in this war that we've seen unfolding over the last 2 or 3 months. You know, and a lot of displaced people had gone there. This is not just a military site. You know, there's hundreds of thousands of people live in Balbec. Some men and some of them have already been displaced. So they're looking at displacement a second, a third, even a fourth time.
Just tell us, Gareth, what's okay? Well, actually, we're gonna end it there. In fact, thank you very much indeed to the Economist Middle East correspondent Gareth Brown in Beirut. Thank you so much. Now to some weather-related news. At least 158 people have been killed in Spain as a result of what's been described as the deadliest flooding in the country's modern history. Torrential rain has devastated the eastern region of Valencia, sweeping away bridges and buildings. Well, local authorities are urging residents to stay home for their safety. Well, the Spanish authorities have published images showing the scale of the damage. The images show vehicles lying along a motorway in the province of Valencia in the aftermath of those floods. Well, people are being advised to avoid travelling to the area as many roads have not been cleared for traffic. Business news stories we're following for you now. Moscow has described as pragmatic a decision by the United States to extend licenses for Russian banks participating in energy transactions. This excludes such transactions from what was a long list of sanctions. Still reeling from the news of the latest budget, the British Finance Minister Rachel Reeves says that she has had to make some, quote, difficult decisions. Some praise the budget for investment in public services, but others are worried about the consequences of higher borrowing and taxes, especially those impacting businesses. Well, the UK's 10-year borrowing rate reached its highest level since 2023 on fears of a resurgence in inflation. Let's have a reminder of our top stories here on Al Arabiya News. Only 5 days to go until the presidential election, and both candidates are heading west. Kamala Harris to Las Vegas for a rally alongside Jennifer Lopez. Donald Trump heading to Arizona for an interview with Tucker Carlson. There's been catastrophic flooding in Spain, which has claimed the lives of at least 158 people. Well, the country's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez is urging people to stay home during the rescue efforts. And the Lebanese caretaker Prime Minister Najib Mikati says that Israel and Hezbollah could be set to agree on a ceasefire within the coming days. That is all we have time for. Coming up next is special interviews, and at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time, do join me for Global News Today, a roundup of top international news with exclusive insights and fresh perspectives from leading experts and influential decision makers. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned.
news, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Arabiya News.
It's very impressive.
Where knowledge meets perspective.
From the White House to Gaza, Kyiv to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake and artificial intelligence,
They've got to have a vote and a say.
it's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on the Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation.
Bill Ford, welcome to Riyadh. Thank you so much for joining me on Al Arabiya. I want to kick off by asking you about your new ventures in the Middle East.
Well, first, Hadley, thank you for having me here. It's great to be back in Riyadh, here for the FII. But earlier this week, we announced the opening of our office here in Saudi Arabia. We've been active in the region for about 10 years, but now we'll have a team on the ground looking for investments throughout the whole GCC.
Tell me about what you see as the most exciting part about how Saudi Arabia is performing today.
Well, really building on the last 8 years of Vision 2030, there's been an entrepreneurial ecosystem that's begun to take hold. That's extremely exciting. And just a couple of quick notes. 5 years ago, Saudi venture capital was $150 million per year. Today, it's $1.4 billion per year. So the venture ecosystem has started. And something that's even more exciting is a lot of young Saudis who went abroad to be educated or maybe to work are coming back here to go into the private sector and either start companies or join early stage companies. So it is all the makings of a very exciting entrepreneurial ecosystem.
Usually there's this big narrative that people from the West come to Saudi Arabia, they're looking for investors, they're looking for cash, but you're putting business into this part of the world.
Yeah, it's a real shift. I mean, we've had some great investors from Saudi Arabia for the last 20 years and the GCC, and they've been an important part of our program. But what's really exciting now is that the amount of opportunities to invest in the GCC and in Saudi Arabia have increased significantly. And so this team on the ground is a full-fledged investment team. We incubated them in London, but now they're moving here and they look for investments in the region.
What do you say to the narrative in the West that Saudi Arabia is running out of time and running out of cash?
Well, they better get over here and visit and see the energy and the dynamism.
Yeah. But you're not worried by the borrowing?
No, I'm not really, because I think the private sector economy is growing 4% plus. I think that's going to carry the region. Yeah. And again, the sense of entrepreneurship and new company creation is so exciting right now.
Yeah.
I actually think they'll be fine.
Talk me through how you see the macro picture. If you were going to invest in anything right now, what would it be?
Well, one of the most exciting things going on here in Saudi is the whole fintech explosion.
Yeah.
They've always had some great financial institutions, but the amount of innovation in financial services is really on par with what we're seeing in other parts of the world. And that's really exciting. So I think fintech will be a major focus. The consumer markets, it's a very well-developed consumer market. B2C internet companies are really working here.
Yeah.
And so I think those two areas in particular will be exciting.
What are the things that you're worried about in the short to medium term? Are we talking about the presidential election? What's happening with China?
Well, the two big events here for the second half of 2024 have really been the interest rate cycle, which appears to have turned in most of the Western world and most parts of the world. That's good news. And the second is waiting on the U.S. election. I think once we clear those two major issues or major events, I think you'll see a lot more deal making happen, because again, people were on the sidelines to some extent waiting for those two things to happen.
If you were going to make a bet, would it be, the bombastic Trump or the verbally incontinent Kamala Harris? Who's going to win?
I don't know, but I do think, President Trump, if he does win, would be very good for business. Not just in the United States, but I think here in the Middle East. I think he's always had a pro-business agenda. He believes in the private sector. And I think those two factors will really, unleash a lot of energy that's been pent up for the last 4 years.
Yeah, speaking of energy, the conversations that I've been having with energy ministers over the last year or so have been about AI and how much energy that's going to actually need, and that the world is not, in fact, prepared for that. What does it say to you that countries like the UAE, like Saudi Arabia, are making such big investments in AI simply because they're going to be able to fund that energy need?
I think that the Middle East is incredibly well positioned to capitalize on what's going to happen in AI. It has two of the things that are absolutely essential to make AI work. One, as you said, Hadley, is power. Yeah. Well, the second is capital. This is, unlike the internet cycle, this is a very capital-intensive business to build AI. The data center needs, the compute power, the chips that are required, all that requires capital. So the GCC in Saudi, with those two assets on their side, again, are very well positioned to be a global player in AI.
Who do you think is going to be left behind?
I'm worried about Europe. I'm worried about the economic dynamism in Europe. I'm worried about their energy security. I'm worried about their level of government intervention into the private sector and what that means long term. And they're competing in a world where you have China, you've got regions like the Middle East that are forward-looking and pro-business. You've got the U.S., which continues to plow ahead at 3% kind of growth rates with a lot of dynamism. And I think they're going to have to really get their act together if they want to compete.
Bill, it's wonderful to have you. Thank you so much for joining
Arabiya. Thank you.
Thank you for taking the time. It's good to see you here at FII in Riyadh. Let's discuss first what we're seeing in parts of the region here where there are big national development strategies, such as the Vision 2030 in Saudi and other sort of visions in countries around the region. This needs a lot of private capital deployment. So how do you see the role of the IFC playing in providing those instruments, these innovative financing instruments, such as PPPs or commodity and trade finances? What's your role in bridging this gap?
Yes, it's clear that when you talk about growth right now, you think about private sector investment, because countries have been spending a lot of resources answering the crisis, the COVID crisis, the slowdown. So he advocates for government to have counter-cyclical policies. At this stage, government has to slow down a little bit on some of the expenditures, and the private sector has to ramp up its investment. So what makes it possible for private sector to invest in a country? First, uncertainty, and I think we don't have that problem in Saudi Arabia, where there's a lot of certainty about what is happening in the future. There is political stability. And in that context, what we are doing is to help the government to choose the right project, to structure it the right way, and that's what a big contribution of ours. But we want to do it in a way which responds to the challenges of today, which is climate change, which is sustainability, which is social inclusion. So we have units on PPP advisory and what we call upstream, which is looking at projects well ahead of time, which are here to prepare project and prepare pipeline for it. Secondly, we have what we call asset monetization, which means that when a country have already, a government has built some assets and wants to offload it to the private sector, they need a partner who can help structure those transactions, and IC is playing that role. We are playing it in Egypt, where I signed myself with the Prime Minister a memorandum of understanding, where we will be helping the government of Egypt to monetize a certain number of assets, airport and other assets. This is the kind of things that we are doing. Lastly, we are bringing a lot of innovation in terms of financial products, blue bonds, blue loans, green bonds, and also bonds, thematic bonds such as gender bonds. So all these kind of things is what IFC is bringing at the table, and it helps a crowding in private sector and capital to be able to respond to the priority of the country.
FDIs in 2023 saw a slowdown, and specifically FDIs into emerging markets witnessed a slowdown in 2023 going into those countries. So there is a gap to fill. What do you foresee the role of South-South investment, especially that certain countries in the South, like Saudi Arabia, can export part of its capital into certain investments in the global South?
What we are seeing in Saudi Arabia is quite impressive. We are seeing a Vision 2030 which aims at diversifying the source of growth in Saudi Arabia by looking at different sectors outside the oil sector. But at the same time, we are seeing companies from Saudi Arabia looking at emerging markets. Actually, today I had already 4 important meetings with companies which are investing in Uzbekistan, in Africa, other parts of the world. Places where IFC has a competitive advantage because we know this market, we know the risk attached to this market, we have instruments to de-risk those investments. So I talk about today, I discuss project on water project, energy project, talk about data center investment, and this is the trend. And what I'm seeing is that there is not only a willingness of the global South companies to invest in more riskier country, riskier put in the bracket, then sometimes countries which are a different I would say, touch or approach. And I think it's linked to the culture, it's linked to the history of those countries who understand the trajectory that they have taken to reach the level they are now. So we are benefiting also from the lessons that Saudi Arabia have learned through their trajectory, their growth trajectory, and bringing it also to other countries. I'm seeing today, yesterday, there were a big event, a summit with African leaders. We showed how Saudi Arabia is playing an essential role in supporting investment in Africa, for instance. And we are working with them in that area.
John, thank you very much for this interview. Let us start by asking you about what has happened so far in terms of development of the Red Sea project, and how many hotels do you have up and running right now? And can you tell us a little bit more about what has been achieved versus targets?
Well, look, nice to see you again. We've been very busy over the last few years, and we're now starting to realize the vision, which is to open our destination to the world. Today we announced the opening of our 4th resort at the Red Sea project. We have 6 Senses, we have St. Regis, we have Ritz-Carlton, and today we announced the opening of Shebara, which is a wholly owned and operated property run by Red Sea Hospitality. Next year, we have another 11 resorts that are under construction and will open by this time next year at Red Sea. And in addition to that, we have a further 8 resorts at Kamala, which is our sister project, which is about 150 kilometers north of the Red Sea project. So next year is a very big year for us. But behind the scenes, we've built infrastructure, utilities. We've built an airport that is serving the destination right now, ultimately to serve the end purpose of welcoming visitors from both Saudi Arabia and around the world.
What about Amala? When will it first open its resorts?
So this time next year, we expect to open all 8 resorts up at Amala.
Together,
along with the 11 resorts at the Red Sea. So 19 resorts next year. Very big year for Red Sea Global.
And you mentioned that the hotel that was just announced today, Shebara, will be operated by the Red Sea Hospitality Company, which is part of the Red Sea development. So can you tell us a little bit more about this and the new hotels which will be opened? How many of them will be operated by you as well?
So, so Red Sea Hospitality is operating a limited number of hotels. We have all of the best brands from around the world. As I've already mentioned some, we also have Four Seasons, we have Rosewood, we have SLS, we have Intercontinental, we have Miraval, we have Fairmont, Jumeirah. So we have a selection of the best hotel brands. So we felt that there was an opportunity for us to grow a homegrown brand to operate some of our more iconic properties. So that was the essence behind it. But we've operated and created 26 different subsidiaries that basically support the overall destination, and Red Sea Hospitality is just one of them.
When you mention the infrastructure, can you tell us a little bit more what has been done so far to make the Red Sea resorts more accessible to people, and especially the airport?
Well, infrastructure covers many things. So we've built from scratch brand new utilities to serve the destination. You may recall we did a deal with Aqua Power, a consortium that is building an infrastructure to provide power, water, waste for the destination. That system is now nearing completion. It's already operating and serving the destinations that are open. So that's just one part of the infrastructure. And that was a big design, build, operate, transfer agreement. The airport is open. It actually opened in September of last year. So it's been operating for a little over a year now. We have, starting next month, 10 flights a week. We have 4 from Riyadh, 2 from Jeddah, 2 from Dammam, and 2 from Dubai. So we opened international flights a couple of months ago. So that's what's serving the destination today. But next year, we'll ramp up the airlift to align with the increase in the number of hotels that are operating. So we'll see many more destinations, both regionally and hopefully some international destinations, as well as the frequency and number of flights that will be serving the Red Sea.
Are there any changes to the airport as well? Any development, or this is only increasing the capacity of the airport?
So the airport opened with our seaplane terminal. We have a seaplane business. I neglected to mention, to get to some of our islands, you can go by seaplane, a bit like the Maldives.
Like the Maldives.
But the main terminal building is under construction, and we will open the terminal building at the beginning of next year. So January, February, depending on testing, will be when we open that, so that we will have the full capacity for the airport. And that airport is designed for the end state, which will cater for 1 million passengers a year. Our first phase will only need for around 300 to 350,000 passengers.
John, we hear a lot these days about reprioritizing spending in the kingdom, reprioritization of projects. Is there any reprioritization happening with the Red Sea development? Are you changing your plans for any of the hotels, any of the spending that was planned for initially?
No, the simple answer to the question is no. We are fully funded, and all our commitments going forward have been already sourced and funded. And we're going to fund the completion of the balance of work that we're doing through a combination of the funding that we're receiving from our shareholder, which is Public Investment Fund, as well as our own resources. Remember, by the end of next year, we will have 24, 25 resorts operating. They'll be spitting off free cash flow, and we will use some of that money to not only dividend to our shareholder, but also to fund the ongoing development of the project. So the answer is no. First phase is nearing completion, as I said. But in addition to that, we've already started and broken ground on phase 2 projects. We have a project called Lahek, and we have another project at Amala, which is a special island that we haven't announced yet, but these projects are already underway and, as I said before, already funded.
John, when it comes to investments, can you tell us what is the value of investments that has gone into the Red Sea development and Amala so far? And you say that you started generating revenues. Can you tell us what are the revenue streams for you?
Okay, so, to date, I think we've committed something in the order of 90 billion riyal. We've spent 60 billion, cash out the door, and have obviously much more to spend going forward. Our revenues are going to come from largely the hotels. So the hotels that are now starting to operate are generating revenues from rooms, from F&B, and so on, as well as our various subsidiary companies. We have transportation companies that transfer guests that generate revenue. So there'll be multiple revenue sources that will ultimately feed into the pot, which will then allow us to either create dividends for our shareholder and or obviously fund further development.
Elon, welcome to Riyadh. It's been quite an incredible 90 days for you, my friend. XAI Colossus came online 122 days. You're about to double in size again. The extraordinary success of the 5th mission of Starship and the booster capture, amazing. The launch of Cybercab, Starlink helping in disaster relief, progress with Optimus, the second Neuralink human patient, new record users on X. And that's in 90 days. I'm sure I've missed a few things. Welcome.
Yeah, I've been playing a significant role in this election.
I think I saw you someplace on X dealing with election issues. Let's talk a little bit about AI, which is on the tips of everybody's conversations here. When we spoke last in March at the Abundance Summit, your prediction was that AI was increasing at a rate as fast as 100 times per year, and that by 2029 or 2030, we might see AI as capable as 8 billion humans. Are you still seeing that pace?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult. It's a difficult thing to quantify exactly, but I certainly feel comfortable saying that it's getting 10 times better per year, which is, let's say it's, 4 years from now, that would mean 10,000 times better. So maybe 100,000. Yeah.
And
I think it will be able to do anything that any human can do. Possibly within the next year or two, and then it's what can it, how much longer than that does it take to be able to do what all humans can do combined? I think not long. Probably only, I don't know, 3 years from that point. So it like 2029-ish, 28, something like that.
The other conversation we've had, and you came out in the same side as Jeffrey Hinton in this, was 80% probability it's going to be awesome. 20% probability we're screwed. Are you still on those odds?
Yeah, I mean, one could say it's most likely going to be great, and there's some chance, which could be 10 to 20%, that it goes bad. The chance is not zero that it goes bad, but overall, one could say that the cup is 80% full. Is one positive way to look at it. Maybe 90%.
All right, I like that, increasing odds. What keeps you What keeps you up at night besides running 6 companies?
Waking up early to participate in talks like this one.
I felt very guilty asking you to do this, but thank you for joining us nonetheless.
But in terms of worried about the future, I think AI is a significant existential threat and something we should be paying close attention to. It's probably the most significant near-term threat. The longer term than that is the global population collapse. Birth rates have been collapsing pretty much worldwide, and we're headed to a situation where, for example, based on current birth rates, South Korea would have about a third of its current population, perhaps much less. Europe would have about half of its current population, perhaps much less. And I should say that those numbers are if the birth rate were suddenly to return to 2.1 per woman, which is a stability point, which it's not doing. So if the current compounding effect continues, you would see really many countries become 5% of their current size or less within 3 generations.
I know you've been doing
I would consider that to be a very big problem. And I think for most countries, they should view the birth rate as the single biggest problem they need to solve. I mean, if you don't make new humans, there's no humanity. And all the policies in the world don't matter.
I know you've been doing your part to maintain the birth rate in the U.S.
Yes, I am. I mean, you've got to walk the talk. So I do have a lot of kids, and I encourage others to have lots of kids.
But on the AI, and I'm sorry to go negative on this, but what are you doing right now that's most important for countering that 10% probability of dystopian outcomes? Is there something, or is there a regulation that you're promoting? How do you think about, the upside will take care of itself. How do you protect against the downside?
Well, my instinct with respect to AI safety is that you have to create a maximally truth-seeking AI, which may sound obvious, but that's what I'm seeing being produced is not maximally truth-seeking. It tends to be trained to be politically correct, and for a lot of the AIs that are being trained in the San Francisco Bay Area, they are that they have taken on the philosophy of the people around them, which kind of makes sense. So, you have sort of a woke, nihilistic, in my opinion, philosophy that is being built into these AIs, and they're being taught to say crazy things in some cases that are very troubling. Like when Google Gemini came out, people asked whether it is which is worse, misgendering Caitlyn Jenner or global thermonuclear war, and it said misgendering Caitlyn Jenner, which is obviously a problem because we'd all die in global thermonuclear war. And so if you have an AI that's programmed for things like that, it could conclude that the best way to ensure that nobody is misgendered is to annihilate all humans, thus making the probability of a future misgendering zero. That's highly problematic. So you really want to have a maximally truth-seeking AI, and I can't emphasize that enough. That's incredibly important. And obviously build an AI that loves humanity, and I think these. So I'm a little concerned. That's why I created XAI, which is to have an AI that is maximally truth-seeking, that aspirationally does love humanity, and will seek the best interests of humanity going forward.
You just tweeted that you're doubling the size of the Colossus cluster. What are your thoughts?
We already have with XAI the most powerful training cluster in the world, and we're about to double it.
Energy is a point of conversation here. How concerned are you about providing sufficient energy for the growing hungry clusters globally?
Yeah, I think things are currently chip limited, or they're not quite chip limited. They're getting to the point where they're limited by voltage transformers and installation, and they will become limited by energy. So there will be a tremendous amount of energy that's needed for digital intelligence and also for electrification of transport. So those two things are a big deal. We're going to need a lot of energy. The long term, almost all the energy that we'll get is going to come from the sun. One way to look at civilization is progress on the Kardashev scale.
We're just barely getting to one.
Well, we're far from
half.
I think we might be close. I'm not. It's not clear to me we're above 1% on the Kardashev scale 1. Because Kardashev scale 1 means you've harnessed all the power of the planet. I think we've probably harnessed less than 1% of the power of Earth. Now, Kardashev scale 2 is you've harnessed all the power of your sun. The sun is overwhelmingly the largest source of energy in the solar system. Everything else maybe amounts to about 1/trillionth of the energy in the solar system compared to the sun. Safely less than 1/trillionth of all the energy is non-sun in our solar system.
Yeah, we're using 1/8000th of the sun's energy hits the surface of the Earth.
Just that hits the surface of the Earth.
Yeah.
Yes. And the percentage of the sun's energy that hits the surface of the Earth is less than 1/trillionth of the energy that the sun produces. So almost all energy long term will be solar. It rounds up to 100%. So it rounds up to 100%. That's how much of the energy in the future will be solar. When you view things from a Kardashev standpoint.
Elon, we have a number of national leaders, corporate financial leaders from the Middle East here. What's your advice to decision makers here in the room that don't want to miss the AI transformation, that will be part of the leadership of that AI transformation? Do they need to build their own clusters here? Are they partnering?
Yeah, I think there's probably all countries will have their own AI clusters over time. It's currently very difficult to actually build an AI cluster and have it run. It's not like just pulling a computer out of a box. They are currently very difficult to run. And you have to say, are you going to be training a frontier model? Because if you're training a frontier model, then you need a massive amount of compute and a level of technical skill that is only a few companies possess. But over time, I think every country will have AI compute clusters. It's just going to be a normal thing that every country has. So, yeah.
So basic infrastructure for every nation, like they have an electrical grid.
Yeah, it'll be something like electricity, or or having an airline or something like that. It's every country will have AIs or multiple AIs. So, and there will be a lot of robots.
There'll be a lot of robots. But we had
way more robots than people.
Yeah, let's have that conversation a second, because people are concerned about, as you said, dwindling populations. AI and robots have the potential to help support the GDP.
Yes.
Congratulations on Optimus 2 and soon Optimus 3. Your prediction on the number of robots by 2040, humanoid robots to be specific, what order of magnitude?
By 2040?
Yeah. So.
I think if you say like 2040, probably there are more humanoid robots than there are people.
So on the order of 10 billion. Yeah.
Yes.
And your price point on these humanoid robots? You're pretty good on pricing. Sometimes you're off on timing.
Yeah, I'm often optimistic on timing, but although the press will report when I'm late, but not when I'm early. For example, our Shanghai factory, we thought it would take about a year and a half, and we did it in 11 months. Our Nevada factory, we thought 2 years, we did it in 18 months.
Or the Colossus cluster.
Texas factory, 2 years, we did it in 14 months. So I've been early actually many times. It's just not reported. So when I make a prediction, I try to say what is the 50th percentile likely, which means that half the time I should be wrong. So I'm not sandbagging essentially. But I think that's once you get out to 2040, that's a long time from now. Going 25 years, there'll be at least 10 billion humanoid robots.
And price point?
Yeah, the price point will be, I think, quite low. Probably $20,000, $25,000 for a robot that can do anything. We will be in a future, assuming we are on the good path of AI, I think we will be in a future of abundance. Obviously you wrote a book called Abundance. So I think you would agree that is probably the outcome. Basically anyone will be able to have any goods and services they want. The actual marginal cost of goods and services will be extremely low in the future.
In our last 4 minutes, let me change the subject to something near and dear to both of our hearts. Congratulations on Starship. It was literally awesome. Probably the engineering feat of this decade, if not more.
Not bad for humans. Not bad for humans. We did that with no AI was involved in that whatsoever. So
amazing.
I'm glad to say that we were able to do that entirely with human brains and without AI. I think in the future the AI might look at that and say, not bad for a bunch of monkeys.
When are we on Mars? When is Starship on Mars?
I think we'll be able to launch some Starships to Mars in 2 years. So at the next Mars window, which is in about 26, 27 months, we're just about to start, or we're at the beginning of a Mars transit window now, and they occur every 26 months. So just over 2 years, we'll be sending our first uncrewed starships to Mars. And then if those work out well, and we don't increment the crater count on Mars, then we'll send humans 2 years after that.
So a challenge to be on the surface of Mars before the end of the decade sounds like a reasonable proclamation for either,
I think so.
for either side of the White House, hopefully.
Yeah.
I will go
I feel
there.
more optimistic about it with a Trump White House than a non-Trump White House, because the biggest impediment to progress that we're experiencing is regulatory, is overregulation.
Got to keep those whales and sharks safe. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It just takes us. I mean, it takes longer to get the permit to launch than to build a giant rocket, and the bureaucracy in the U.S. has been growing every year, and has particularly grown under the Biden administration. And unless we do something to scale back the overregulation, I call it sort of, America is getting, and a lot of countries are getting slow strangulation from overregulation. And unless something is done to push back on that, it'll eventually become illegal to do almost any large project, and we won't be able to get to Mars.
Last subject, congrats on the cybercab rollout. Pretty extraordinary. Kathy Woods predicted it to be, multiple trillions of dollars of potential GDP growth and impact. Give us some predictions on when we'll see cybercab, when we'll be ordering a cybercab.
Yeah, well, Tesla, unsupervised full self-driving, we expect to be working in the U.S. next year with the Model 3 and Y. So you don't have to wait for the robo-taxi or cybercab for Tesla to release autonomy. We're currently expecting to exceed human safety levels in Q2 next year, and then substantially go beyond that thereafter. And so really it's just a software update to the cars to be able to launch our self-driving network. So we expect to do unsupervised full self-driving and start that in California and Texas, around the middle of next year. And then, we have 7 million cars on the road. We'll have 9.5 million cars by the end of next year. So, and eventually we'll have a fleet of 100 million plus vehicles, and they'll all be autonomous. The cybercab with no steering wheel or pedals, we're expecting to reach volume production in 2026. So that's certainly interesting. But like I said, the actual launch of a robotic taxi, unsupervised full self-driving, is actually next year. And at the event, the Tesla autonomy event, we had 50 cars, 30 Model Ys that were driverless, and 20 of the cybercabs. And so autonomy is here, is what I'm saying. And and all cars will drive themselves. This is a no-brainer. And they'll get to where they're 10 times safer than human-driven cars, which will save, perhaps 1 million lives a year globally. And then Optimus starts limited production next year, 2025, and then should be in volume production in 26. And then we'll grow to, I think, ultimately be the biggest product of any kind ever. So, and I kind of agree with Ark Invest and Kathy Wood that autonomy, like the sort of robotic taxis, makes Tesla kind of like about a $5 trillion company. The Optimus robot, I think, makes Tesla a $25 trillion yes. company. It's not even clear what money means in the future.
We end up in a post-capitalist society at some point. Elon, you make
we do sort of end up. It does become kind of post-capitalist, and like I said, and I know you agree with this. That we're and looking at the most likely bright side, we're headed for an age of abundance where anyone can have any goods and services they want. It won't be a case of universal basic income. It'll be a case of universal high income is the most likely outcome.
You make it look easy, my friend. Thank you for making some time available. I know it isn't easy.
Jerry, great to meet you here at FII 8 this year. All right, so at Diriyah Gate, it's a story that started maybe 6 years ago. Correct me if I'm wrong. Where are we at now? What's the percentage of the project that's completed? What are the new areas that you've opened up recently? Give us an update.
Thank you very much. Good to see you, and thank you always for your excellent coverage.
Thank you.
So, Diriyah is critical as a giga project with the now commercial side, meaning the PIF-owned company. We've had very substantial progress because even though we're a 2030 giga project, we started opening assets in 2021. We opened up the UNESCO site and our very successful Bajeti district in 2022. 2023, we introduced our hotel practice, our museum practice. But would you believe, only in 2024, the progress we've made. We now have 9 kilometers of parks finished. We have 6,000 of our 60,000 parking spots underground finished, generating revenue. We open next month in November our first of our 42 hotels, our Bob Samhan Hotel, 134 rooms, Marriott Luxury Collection, walking distance from the UNESCO site. Our Wadi Sfar project, we already broke ground on Amman, Six Senses, Chedi, and then Fushan. But now also in our opening event on November 20th, we call it Bashir Diriyah, we will announce the groundbreaking for 12 additional hotels. This includes Ritz-Carlton, Baccarat, Corinthia. I mentioned Fushan, Armani, Rosewood, Raffles, the Address. So not only are we on time, we're on budget, and now with the 7,000 people here, a lot of buzz because they see Diriyah coming out of the ground. So it's no longer renderings, it's no longer concept. Now you see it.
Well, Jerry, you mentioned that some of your assets are already generating revenue. So
Correct.
Tell us a little bit of the licenses. Whom have you licensed to set up shop in at Diriyah Gate? So other than hotels, what about the retailers and other companies?
Yeah, so Diriyah in Diriyah 1, which is historical Diriyah, it's meant to be the largest walkable, pedestrian-friendly city, but all with a high environmental impact and sustainability, right? Diriyah just won the largest global certification from LEED's Platinum for 4 kilometers. Never been given before. Diriyah just won 4th year in a row, best place to work. Diriyah just won a global award, 165 million construction man hours without a fatality. So we have a safe environment, very happy environment, 80% Saudi. Now on the licenses, all the major luxury hotel brands have signed up, 42 of them. But these hotels will be open prior to 2030. Now it's interesting because why only 1 or 2 hotels open now? Because what happened is to make Diriyah a walkable city, we had to put in 10 million cubic meters of infrastructure underground, including 60,000 parking spots for tour buses, taxis, Uber, deliveries, garbage, new fiber optics, water, electric. So we had to dig, if you will, a 45-meter hole, 10 kilometers on rock.
No easy task, eh?
No, we took out 700,000 loads of rock. So now everybody says, what did you do with all the rock? right? But to show you His Royal Highness's genius, when you drive King Khalid Road or drive the Western Ring Road to the airport, you'll see all this beautiful mustard stone with all plantings for Green Riyadh. That most of that comes from Diriyah. So we built the infrastructure, smart city technology, because you know the Crown Prince is very strict environmentally.
Very keen on that.
Very strict environmentally. So the fact that we are, all our concrete, all our cement, all our pavers on the ground now, net carbon zero, huh? The technology to remove carbon from it. So I'm very honored because to have a great staff of 3,000 people, 40,000 people on the job in the middle of Riyadh, but to be on time and on budget, all the, so many people. But you know what we're seeing now? A big acceleration in foreign capital coming into the kingdom. But all the luxury brands, our licenses and retails, not only are they coming, all the luxury brands you know, but most of them are moving their regional headquarters to Diriyah. Now, Diriyah 2, which is a separate project, we will have 500 tech companies, 100 media companies, thank you very much, and 50 entertainment companies. So our brothers and sisters at the Royal Commission for Riyadh City have already signed 300 of those 500 companies, maybe more by now. So Diriyah 2 will be the Silicon Valley, the tech. It'll bring a lot of young people. We're building 30,000 apartments and homes and villas because Diriyah will have an ecosystem now by 2030 for 100,000 people.
Well, waiting on to hear more good progress on Diriyah 2 in the coming few years. Thank you very much, Jerry.
Thank you. Very nice to see you.
Same
only
here.
One Diriyah.
Only one Diriyah.
Only one Diriyah. Thank you.
Absolutely. Mr. Paul Hudson, the CEO of Sanofi, thank you very much for joining us here at the FII. Please tell us, when you look at the Saudi market, it's a growing population, it's the biggest economy in the region. When you're viewing this market, what sort of investment opportunities do you find here?
Well, this is quite an incredible market, in fact, the speed that it's evolving and the long-term planning that they're putting in place, particularly in health through 2030. You have to imagine when we're making long-term investment decisions, we want some predictability of commitment to something much higher, like a purpose around delivering better healthcare. Here, it is absolutely front and center. People are smart, the capital is there, the people are motivated, so it's an easy choice for us in the end.
Mr. Hudson, how will Sanofi, or how can Sanofi support the Vision 2030 in Saudi Arabia, which aims to diversify its economy? It has specific targets when it comes to several sectors. So how can your company support those goals?
Well, we know that healthcare and education are absolutely critical to vibrant economies. We'll play a little role in healthcare. We've found a very open government that wants to access innovation, not only in terms of manufacturing and research and development, but also getting access to innovation for patients, people with chronic diseases who need the very latest medicines. There's a willingness to do that. We'll play a big part. We are going to be the world's leading immunology company. We're one of the biggest pharmaceutical companies in the world. We're excited to bring all of our new launches here to Saudi Arabia.
You've had an announcement just last week with the NOPCO. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, the first of one or two, I hope. But this was to build insulin manufacturing here. And we'll make more than 14 million insulin pens right here in Saudi Arabia over the next few years. So that provides supply resiliency, expertise, knowledge, tech transfer. So it's really about upskilling and also us putting firm roots, deep roots into the country.
This comes probably as a part of Saudi Arabia's endeavors to localize content, to create local content, do transfer of knowledge. So can you tell us a little bit about the timelines? How can you support with those goals through this project and maybe others?
Well, these things, we have to raise them from the ground. But there is, I've learned one thing as I've been here the last few days. There is, a long history of doing things with discipline and continuity. And, we'll bring that factory up and we'll make sure that it's here for the long term to help patients with diabetes. We're also working on other projects around vaccines to try and do something very similar. And if we can get to a good place with the government on that, we may be able to do even more. So bring our expertise, help people understand and educate them locally with it, build the capability locally, bring the access to that innovation to people in this great country. It's just the beginning, really, for us.
So this is your first FII, FII 8. Will we see you next year then?
Well, you know, I didn't know what to expect. It's not only my first FII, it's my first trip to Saudi Arabia. And for me, it's been eye-opening. You know what you read, you know what you see, you know what you hear. But when you're on the ground, I've found that people have been incredibly welcoming, very constructive, very energizing. I've met so many people just before and after a session we just had that, you know, continued relationships, people I know from the global economic community, healthcare. You know, yeah, this is a cool event. We'll see. It's the first day. We'll know a bit more tomorrow.
Well, we hope to see you more often in Saudi Arabia. Thank you very much for this interview, Mr. Hudson.
Well, thank you to both of you. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.
Rio de Janeiro. It's a chill, fuss-free Southern American city where anything and everything goes. You'll get a taste of the old and the new, fast and slow, and the luxurious and the modest. It is called Cidade Marvelosa to its local inhabitants. It is also known as a super city, with practically more than 14 million people residing in it. It is a city of history, culture, and tradition, as well as hip, flair, and style. The city is known for its picturesque views. The jaw-dropping beauty of the landscape is all thanks to the Atlantic Mountains nearby, with flourishing rainforests. These mountains actually play a big role in the city's population. It makes up most of the area in the south. Relaxed and carefree, tourists get to go on peaceful nature trips where they can make the most out of the postcard-worthy views. Meanwhile, the north area is slowly getting crowded, with sprawling suburbs rapidly taking over. And the west is quite busy too, with huge malls being built alongside highways and multi-lane roads. But the cool, carefree vibe remains thanks to the beaches nearby. And Rio's golden beaches are a marvel too. But the things to do in the city are endless, no matter the weather, because the city is teeming with infectious cheer and creativity that's definitely attractive for tourists. There's the famous Copacabana, which has everything for you. Like the locals, walk by the beachside in the early morning and sneak in some exercise, or perhaps play some football, enjoy the sunset, or dance to the samba music that's sure to be playing nearby. Then visit the Copacabana shopping district. Take a commute to the town's known historic center, to the city's stunning architecture and structures that won't fail to amaze you. The buildings are known to be influenced by a blend of historic Portuguese colonial architecture. It blends well into Rio's modern city lifestyle and the famous Brazilian atmosphere. Finally, cap off the day with an unforgettable sunset experience. In the early evening, get back near the beach to watch the sun set. Rio is truly a city that's sought after for its tropical weather and laid-back charm, which never fails to lure travelers who decide to stop by.
From the White House to Gaza, Kiev to Beijing, elections, economics, and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake, and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers.
My campaign is going very well.
Presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on the Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation.
At Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Arabiya News,
It's very impressive.
where knowledge meets perspective.
Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive insights and fresh perspectives from leading experts and influential decision makers every weekday here on Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson, coming up on today's program. The Trump-Biden name-calling saga continues. In a playful response to Biden's remark about Trump supporters being garbage, Trump gets behind the wheel of a garbage truck. With less than a week to go before the US election, concerns mount about potential unrest if Trump doesn't secure a victory. Could we be looking at a possible repeat of the January 6th Capitol riot? At this point, every vote counts as the race between Trump and his Democratic rival Harris is neck and neck. And we'll be turning our eye to the situation in the Middle East as Israel launches strikes on Balbec, the 3,000-year-old UNESCO World Heritage Site, and that's drawing fierce criticism from UNESCO and historians alike. Hello and welcome. Dressed in a high-vis orange vest, the Republican nominee and former President Donald Trump was sat in the passenger seat of a garbage truck in Wisconsin in a campaign stunt, taking a jab at the Democrats over President Joe Biden's comments in which he suggested that Trump supporters are garbage.
How do you like my garbage truck? This truck is in honor of Kamala and Joe Biden. And Joe Biden should be ashamed of himself if he knows what he's even doing. And she should be ashamed because she shouldn't let him do it. She's the vice president, but I assume she's acting as the president. She should never have let that happen.
Donald Trump speaking there while still wearing his bright orange vest. Trump later took the stage at a rally in Wisconsin, defending his supporters once again. 250 million Americans are not garbage, he firmly said.
And I have to begin by saying 250 million Americans are not garbage.
Well, I'd like to introduce now Angie Wong, Republican Executive Committee member in Florida, who joins us from Miami. Angie, great to have you with us. Reading reports about you, newspaper articles in which you're quoted, you're described as being an ardent supporter of President Donald Trump. And I gather you've seen him in the last couple of days. And one of the things you say on X is that you see him as being a changed man. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, no, I've been following President Trump for 4 long years. I was there when he announced for his presidency back in November 2022. And it's been a long journey. The man has not had a single day off since he's announced. He's been go, go, go. What's wonderful about President Trump is that I saw him in Mar-a-Lago 2 days ago where he had Gold Star families. These are families who have had family members died in war and overseas. And then the very next day, he's a garbage man, right? Driving around in a garbage truck. So this man can go high, he can go low. His closing argument for this election has just been he's having fun. He's much more relaxed. You can see that in him. He's enjoying it now. Whereas I think when he first started, it was really literally fight, 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 because he felt scorned after the 2020 election for, well, feeling as if he won the election, whereas the electors did not give it to him. So this is the ultimate comeback. You see that he's much more easy now. He's much more relaxed because the polls are all going in his favor.
Are you of the school of thought that he didn't win the 2020 election, or are you of the school of thought that he had it stolen from him?
I am of the thought where I was actually watching the polls, and I did see some anomalies. Now, can I prove that across every single state that he's lost in that did not ultimately give him the election? No, but I have seen enough evidence to show that there was some funny business happening there. This round, the RNC, along with the Trump team, they have been watching the polls very, very closely. And now they're sending their lawyers out to preempt anything that's happening. So, for example, in Pennsylvania, there were supposed poll workers turning people away from the polls when they were standing on line to vote. And that you can't do that kind of thing, but they ran to the courts and they did something about it. In Virginia, the governor, Glenn Youngkin, he ran to Supreme Court when the own state allowed for non-citizens to vote. And luckily, the Supreme Court yesterday voted with Glenn Youngkin and said, no, non-citizens cannot vote in American elections. So it's gotten to that point where we're running to the courts to determine who can vote and who can't vote. And we're stopping any sort of nonsense that we had seen in 2020.
Let's turn our eye to what I think we can call now Garbage Gate, the story that won't go away, and the story that was in the headlines originally as a negative Republican headline. It's now sort of been turned on its head a little bit, and you're having a bit of fun with this. You described yourself as, according to Joe Biden, I'm an Asian American deplorable garbage lady. Let's be clear, though, the word garbage didn't originate in the Democrat camp. It came from the Republican camp. It came from a comedian on Sunday at that now infamous rally in New York. It was an ill-advised joke, wasn't it?
Well, talk about spin room. This is spin room at its best. You're absolutely right to catch that. It was a terrible joke spoken at Madison Square Gardens at a Trump rally, and there was a little bit of press about that, but then all of a sudden Joe Biden took it, spun it around, and gave it back to Donald Trump. This is political tennis, you guys. And Donald Trump took that word that was trending on X, and the next day, you see him driving around in a garbage truck wearing a garbage vest. I was at the early voting sites this morning and watching what was going on there. We saw two men dressed up as garbage men waiting to go in and vote. It is Halloween here in the US. People are dressing up in garbage bags. So you can't, I mean, this is pop culture politics. You couldn't ask for a better campaign message and spinning a negative to a positive and putting it on its head. Donald Trump knows how to do that. He's been in show business all his life. He knew exactly how to spin this message to his favor. And now we're all laughing at it. And the funny thing is, it was Joe Biden who gave this one to him. So you almost have to wonder whether or not President Joe Biden is secretly a MAGA fan.
I mean, there is a certain amount of irony in an election where you want to be highly visible to wear a high visibility vest as President Trump did. But there is a negative side to this for Donald Trump, because, of course, a state like Pennsylvania, 580,000, we think, could be more residents of Puerto Rican heritage. I mean, there's a huge number of potential lost votes in what is a key battleground state, aren't there?
Well, in Pennsylvania, yes, and in many cities. I mean, we are a country of immigrants, but here's the thing: Puerto Ricans, well, guess what? They're not immigrants. They're Americans, right? They are one of our territories. So it's an ill-advised joke. And I personally, I've attended a lot of these rallies and also the RNC convention. So much of this is scripted. So for that joke to have been said at a Trump rally and, the staffers knew that was coming, that was a very, very, very strange choice. So I don't think that they're going to make that mistake again. But we haven't seen the backlash from Puerto Ricans. I was on the ground with the news crew speaking with the Puerto Rican community. And honestly, they're so excited to vote for Trump, not because of, what we can call racist jokes, but mainly because they care about God, they care about family, they care about eggs being under $1 a piece. I mean, this is what people are voting for right now. It's not about that. It's about bringing back sanity and security back into the United States. Yes, was it an off-color joke? Yes. Has Trump made a few of them? Yes. Has his surrogates made a couple of them? All day long. But it's almost to the point where we care more about making sure that we have a savings for our children and making sure that we have something left over for ourselves to, just enjoy life here in the U.S. We can't do that right now. People are choking. We're buried under a lot of debt and a lot of chaos. So we want all of that to go away come November 5th.
5 days to go, and you're probably looking very closely at the polls in your state and more broadly. Are you seeing the needle shift at all?
Tremendously. So here in the county where I represent, Miami-Dade County, we went from a blue county where Joe Biden won by 8 points to a red county just last week. We are now officially a Republican county. I never thought I would see that in my lifetime. We gained close to 18 points. That means 18 percentage tiles of voters went Republican this round. And we're seeing that not just here in Miami, we're seeing it in Tampa, Florida. We're also seeing the needle move in New York City. I mean, imagine, I'm from New York City and I've ran races in New York City. You would never think New York City would go anywhere near even the pink zone. But now, I'm not going to say it's going to turn pink or red anytime soon. It's still very blue, but we're seeing county by county flipping red. And I think that is going to be, when we do the autopsy of 2024, you're going to see traditional blue cities now go towards the red. And a lot of it has to be because of city safety and also because of the economy. And I think that's something that Democrats will have to look at for the midterm election, because if they don't change the message on that, they'll never win another race again in their own cities.
You're, I think, our first Asian American guest, certainly this week. Tell us a little bit about the voting intentions of people in the demographic of Asian Americans. Is there anything that sets Asian Americans apart in terms of their priorities, perhaps going into the election? What's at the top of their mind as they cast their ballots, or is it largely the same as the rest of as every other community?
Well, the Asian American community, especially the voters here, I mean, we're big on small businesses, good public schools, letting big government leave. We don't want to be bothered. We want to live our lives and live it peacefully. Unfortunately, there's been so much shenanigans with defunding the police here in the U.S., with the rhetoric of, well, you're not going to get prosecuted if you steal under $1,000 of merchandise in most cities now. And that is affecting the small business owners, which the Asian American community largely is, right? We rely on our public schools. Well, the public schools have become indoctrination camps for the most part. I had 2 children in public schools. I had to pull them out because of the learning and the teaching. And if you're a parent making inquiries about what they're learning, even forgetting any of the nonsense of politics, but just asking about curriculum, you are then told to go stand in the back of the line. You're not supposed to ask these questions. So all of this is compounding. It's been over 4 years that parents have been sidelined, that small business owners are barely making it in this country. So I think that is driving people who are first-time voters to register to vote and vote for the first time in their lives. And Asian Americans especially, having worked in Asia, they don't want to commit their name, their address, and party affiliation to any piece of paper or voter roll because of generally, what their families would used to say. If you're coming from perhaps communist Vietnam or China or anywhere where you put a political affiliation out there, they can come after you and your family. So that you have that legacy of not trusting the voting process. But now they don't care because their own livelihoods, their own savings, and their children are at stake. So they're coming out in large numbers to vote. And I'm seeing it everywhere across all coalitions, not just Asian Americans, Blacks, Latinos especially. The Democrats have pretty much lost Latinos for another generation or two because they're not going to go, they're escaping socialism themselves if they're from Cuba or Venezuela. So that's what we're seeing. And I think that is the ultimate red wave when we go back and we re-examine this election, is that you're going to see Latinos and Asians and certainly Black men going Republican.
What is it about, for example, on the issue of education? Because I don't think we've talked very much about education either during the course of the last week. top concerns we're being told about are the economy, immigration, reproductive rights. Education hasn't actually been under the microscope yet. So I'd like to just ask you a little bit more about that. What is it hoped by people you're talking to who say they're going to cast their ballot for Donald Trump? What is it about his credentials on the subject of education that makes him the more appealing candidate?
Right. For the American student to be competitive in the future, in the near future, when they're adults, we need to be teaching things like space, engineering, maths, even media literacy, things, and personal finance, for example. These are real hardcore skills and tools that you need to be the next generation of adults. We're not doing that. You know, schools right now are inundated with something we call the DEI initiatives, which is more of the diversity, the equity, the inclusion, all the kind of soft, feel-good stuff for including everybody. And we're talking about race and gender and all that stuff. That's become the top priority of a lot of our schools. Unfortunately, that's coming from our teaching colleges. These are incentives given by the federal government bleeding into the schools. So if you're a school applying for a grant or some sort of school funding, you have to oblige by gender studies, race equity studies, all this stuff. That is all fine and well, and there's a place for that. But we're forgetting that our students are not ranking on the top of the list in a world ranking anymore. We're not producing grade A students anymore. And that is going to hurt us in the future. So I think for President Trump, he's got an eye on education. He wants to bring the schools back to the state. The same way he talks about abortion, it's a state issue. He wants education to be a state issue, and he wants the funding not to be from the federal government, but from the states. And then the reason why that matters is because then each state has its own jurisdiction over what it can teach, where the money's allocated. And I think that's probably a better resource because we're seeing a lot of things being misallocated in school fundings towards social agendas versus actual teaching our students.
Okay, so that's education. Another issue I'd like to ask you a little bit more about is foreign policy. And again, if you've got anything you can add with respect to how Asian Americans view foreign policy in the context of this election, that would be really interesting as well, because obviously Donald Trump claims to be very tough on China. He says he was very tough on China during his previous term in office. Is that something you think Asian Americans want to see more of? And I'd also like to ask you whether events in the Middle East have had any impact on voter intentions there amongst people around you.
No, absolutely. I'll take these two as two separate questions. Certainly, look, Donald Trump has been very, very loud at calling out the Chinese and wanting to put additional tariffs on Chinese-made goods. A lot of it is political. I can tell you already in Washington, D.C., there are a lot of Chinese companies or U.S. companies that do business in China and rely on Chinese products. They're already hiring lobbyists to take care of a problem because they know Donald Trump is likely going to win the election, and they are scared that tariffs are going to jump from 10% to 100% overnight when he takes office. And these are real concerns. So I think that whoever the Secretary of Commerce, Secretary of Treasury, and also the Secretary of State will be, they're going to have a Chinese problem because of a lot of the rhetoric that has been coming out already from the campaign of Donald Trump. So that has to get worked out because there are some realities. Yes, the Chinese and other foreign manufacturers, they're going to be taxed heavily. Now, what is that balance? Because right now, the U.S. is not manufacturing everything it needs for Americans to survive. And they're not going to be paying, for example, $17 for a trash bag for it to be manufactured here in the U.S., right? So there's got to be some realities and something that balances what we can do and what we can't do. And I hope that we have some smart cabinet secretaries who's going to understand that and know how to deal with that, because it is going to be a problem given all the hyper rhetoric about Chinese-made goods. In regards to the Middle East, for sure, the Middle East and the Gaza conflict has created a lot of divide in this election. I was at Columbia University when the riots broke out. Clearly, what we're seeing is this is going to be a major voting bloc and also a problem for Kamala Harris. Donald Trump has taken a position on the Middle East. He is pro-Israel. Kamala Harris is trying to have it both ways. She wants her Jewish voters and she wants her Arab American voters as well. Unfortunately, it's very difficult here in the U.S. to gain both and keep both happy. But she's tried to flip-flop multiple times to please both parties. Remember, Arab Americans here in the U.S., there are major voting blocks in Michigan and in Minnesota and in our cities. And she needs to make sure that she gets that vote, because without that vote, a large percentage of Democrat votes come from her base there. And I don't know whether or not they're for her for multiple reasons, but mainly because she has not taken a strong position on Palestine, on the Gaza conflict, and whether or not she's going to give additional funding to Israel.
There's a lot of name calling during this election campaign. We hear Donald Trump calling Kamala Harris and Joe Biden all sorts of things. The last couple of weeks, we've heard quite extreme rhetoric used by the other side as well. The words like Nazi and fascist being bandied around. Is that something you've ever seen before? And what do you say to people like General John Kelly, Donald Trump's former chief of staff, referring to him as someone who has authoritarian tendencies?
Yeah, I never thought in the last week of the election that I would be defending Donald Trump from being called Hitler. I never thought in the last week of the election I would be defending half of Americans from being called garbage. Words do matter here in the U.S., and I think in particular, when you are labeling someone, a candidate, as Hitler, as Nazis, it gives permission to a certain group of people to then create and incite violence because it's justifiable. And I think, unfortunately, that is what General Kelly was trying to do. And that is dangerous words because he knows that these words are weapons, and it may even be a preemptive or a preview of what's to come after the election. We have long said that even if Donald Trump wins on November 5th, whether or not he makes it to the White House on January 20th, 2025 is a whole other question. There's a lot of booby traps that have already been set up for Donald Trump after the election because in anticipation of a win next Tuesday. One being, the understanding of labeling him as a criminal, a federally charged felon, for example, which he was charged with in a Manhattan court, calling him Hitler. Those things they actually do have constitutional and legal ramifications. He may not be allowed, for example, to be sworn in because of some of these booby traps I'm talking about. And remember, right after the election on November 28th, Donald Trump gets sentenced in a Manhattan court for for his convictions in a fraud case in New York that was well covered earlier this year. Now, if that sentencing goes the same way the Trump organization's CFO went, and the Trump CFO, I believe, got 3 to 5 years in jail. Well, Trump has over 30 counts that he was found guilty for. Will the Supreme Court now step in and say, this is ridiculous? He has been elected president by the American people. He cannot rule from a jail cell. I don't know. These are all big constitutional questions. And I think that's the real fight that we have to prep for because, 5 days from now, likely Donald Trump will be our next president, but what happens thereafter? Sure. And that's where war is going to begin. I think that's when it's going to get very interesting.
Yeah, there's just one last thing I wanted to ask you about, and thanks for raising all those points. You're the founder of something called Operation Bully Proof. And just to read your mission statement: to combat online abuse and harassment by exposing those who misuse digital platforms to spread fake news information and harm others. Are we seeing an upswing, an upturn in online abuse in the run-up to this election, or is it perhaps no different from 2020?
Well, I think the abuse has heightened for sure. Look, this election has been about the man versus the machine, Donald Trump versus the DNC machine. Over and over again, you see him fighting the media and fighting media misinformation. Remember, when he was holding a Trump rally just last Sunday, one of our news networks here ran side-by-side images of when there was a Nazi rally in the same stadium 90 years ago. So, you know, they're really pushing it when it comes to misinformation and when it comes to harassment. Operation Bullyproof is an organization I had started with Melinda Ciccarelli from New Jersey, whose husband's running for governor there. We are not seeing the protection for adults and children because we believe in something called free speech here. And sometimes free speech is taken a little too far. It goes beyond hate speech. It actually goes to endanger people. And right now, our laws and our lawmakers are not protecting average Americans from anything being said about them online. And there has to be a line, right? Especially when it enters criminality. And what we're seeing over and over again is if a crime is committed offline in the real world, you would be arrested. If it's committed online, you wouldn't be arrested for the same exact crime. So that is where we have to kind of re-examine where we are as a society. We believe in free speech, but when crimes are actually committed, when harm is being fed, when misinformation is causing you and I to vote a certain way or buy a certain product or behave a certain way, we have to examine if this is a good thing for us going forward. So that's what Operation Bullyproof is about. It's to, one, find the stalkers and the cyber stalkers in the world, but two, really to almost lobby for a safer internet so that we can just have an open forum and have discussions without not only being attacked, but, you know, without someone coming after your entire family. And we've seen that time and time again. So we need some protections there for everybody.
Okay. All right. We're going to have to leave it there. We're out of time, but really appreciate you speaking to us. Angie Wong, a Republican Executive Committee member in Florida. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you again.
So 5 days left to go until the election. And let's take a look at what the polls have to say at this stage. Well, the 2024 US election is shaping up to be one of the closest races in living memory, with Harris leading by just 1%, according to the latest polls from YouGov. 47% of voters support her, compared to 46% supporting Donald Trump. Well, Kamala Harris may be gaining a slight lead in the elections, but concerns about her policies in Gaza persist among some Americans. At a rally, protesters heckled her, labeling the vice president a war criminal in response to her stance.
We understand the opportunity we have before us to turn the page on the fear
Meanwhile, Donald Trump has vowed that if he wins the election, he will bolster the US economy and protect American jobs, mainly by applying tariffs as high as 60% on goods from China. But whatever the result, the former President Barack Obama has been speaking, and he's been reminding people that Donald Trump, he says, inherited his economy, suggesting that Trump cannot claim full credit.
And the reason some people think, well, I don't know, I remember that economy when he first came in being pretty good. Yeah, it was pretty good, because it was my economy.
Now, both Kamala Harris and Joe Biden have shown strong support for Israel. Well, as a future potential president, Harris's views on the ongoing war in Gaza are a point of concern. Will she adopt a different policy from Biden, who has pledged unconditional US aid and support for Israel? Well, to discuss this, we're joined by Susan Platt, former Chief of Staff to President Joe Biden. Thank you so much for being with us, Susan. I just want to ask you, first of all, we saw Kamala Harris on the stage in Raleigh, North Carolina yesterday. She was interrupted by a heckler who shouted, "Kamala Harris, you have disrespected the Palestinian community." The same thing happened in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. How do you think she handled it?
think she handled it just fine. It's clearly a very challenging situation for all involved and a very sad situation. But right now, she's not the president. She has to get her message out, and we have an election in 5 days. She's made it very clear that what is happening there right now is just a tragedy all the way around. But, you know, let's just see what happens. We're doing the best we can to juggle what we need to do, and let's see what happens in 5 days.
Indeed, and it's not the first time this has happened. People have heckled at Kamala Harris before, shouting words to the effect of "you're a war criminal." Clearly, the impact of a situation 10,000 kilometers away is very real there in the United States. And I just wanted to get your opinion. Do you think it could shift the needle and push voters in one way or the other, Susan?
Well, obviously, people have very strong feelings on both sides of this, but in the whole scheme of things, it may make a little bit of a difference here or there. But the bigger picture is no, I don't believe it will make a bigger difference in the final results of the election, whether it be in states where really there's more of the population, like in Michigan, or in any other state across the country.
Do you get the impression that, for example, Arab Americans who are clearly very angered by what's happening in the Middle East these last 12 months or more, in fact, are more inclined to vote for Donald Trump, for a different approach, or perhaps for a third party, something completely different? What are they saying in the polls and in the media?
Honestly, what I believe is that either they won't vote. I cannot imagine them necessarily voting for Donald Trump. Donald Trump says we just sit down and work it out. I don't know how that's not an answer to the problem. So I don't think it's going to make much of a difference. Maybe, a few votes here and there. Obviously, people care. It's horrible. It's a horrible situation, but it's not easily solved. We know that. And I do think that the bulk of Americans are looking to not only turn the page, but change the chapter of where we are right now and move forward in 2025. So we'll see what happens.
Indeed. Well, changing the chapter for a lot of people would mean not voting for a continuation of President Biden's policy in the Middle East, which is, as far as we know, roughly what Vice President Kamala Harris has in store, isn't it?
Look, it's an important topic, but there are other things that Americans care about. There's other things that American women particularly care about. When you have Donald Trump telling them he's going to protect them, whether they want it or not, I think they've already made a decision on a lot of American women on they don't want that kind of protection. They want their rights back. They don't want them taken away. I think people have made a decision. Just even his former vice president, Mike Pence, is not voting for him. So I think we're looking to do more than just turn the page. We're looking to change the chapter.
Just going back to heckling, and we saw, as I said, Kamala Harris being heckled on two separate occasions just yesterday. How damaging is it for a candidate to be heckled? Does it do anything to affect their brand or how they're perceived by their support base?
Well, it's part of our system. It's part of living in a democracy. They have every right to say their opinion. They have every right to say it loudly if they'd like. They just can't go and commit violence. So do I think it throws her off maybe for a second or two? But no, it doesn't affect most politicians. They understand that people have different opinions, and we're a democracy, and we work it out in our way at the ballot box.
Is there a big difference in how Kamala Harris handles a heckler to how Donald Trump handles a heckler?
Well, Donald Trump tells them to throw them out and lock them up. And I'm not sure that that's an answer. That's part of our democracy, being able to say your opinion on things. Kamala Harris usually will say, hey, I get you have a different opinion. Go ahead and vote differently. And that's the way we do it here in the United States.
Obviously, no particular cause for concern about those incidents yesterday with regards to security. But it has been a tense campaign. And there must be a lot of people who are worried about the spectre of violence looming large over this entire election campaign. And we're not there yet. There's still another few days to go. Is that something that you're concerned about?
Well, it's always a concern living in a free country. But I will tell you, I was there on the ellipse in Washington, D.C. on Tuesday night for her speech, where nearly 75,000 people were there, gathered peacefully, collectively, joyfully. And I think that's what we need to get back to as a country. We need to turn our heads away from fear, denigration. I mean, Donald Trump will say to Americans that we're the trash can of the world. I don't think most Americans believe that. And I think it's time to turn the page. But I will tell you, when you have 75,000 people gathered in one spot, as peaceful as that was, I think we all want to continue in a peaceful way.
You just used the word trash can, which makes me think of the garbage gate, which has been quite a dominant headline in the last 4 or 5 days. Obviously, that was a comment about Puerto Rico being a floating island of garbage that originated in the Republican camp. But it hasn't been done, in the end, it hasn't done any favors to the Democrats either, because President Biden has spoken on the issue and really poured petrol on the flames. Do you think Joe Biden, for whom you used to work, has become more of a liability than an asset to the Harris campaign team?
No, I think we all know what Joe Biden said. It's a kerfuffle about nothing, about an apostrophe. And that kind of rhetoric comes from the MAGA crowd all the time. Kamala Harris said, first of all, she's on the ballot, not Donald Trump. And number two, she denounces any kind of discrimination like that. Donald Trump will go out. I think it's hysterical how the media really has focused on this. When Donald Trump has called her low IQ, lying people here and there, trash can of the world, it's hypocrisy at its best.
But there was a lesson to be learned, wasn't there? I mean, it didn't come from a president at the time, but it came from a former First Lady back in 2016 when Hillary Clinton called Donald Trump's supporters a basket of deplorables. I mean, it's ill-advised, isn't it, to write off tens of millions of Americans who
He didn't
just
do
don't
that.
support you.
Who did that was Donald Trump and the MAGA crowd. Joe Biden said what he meant is the comedian who spoke at the Madison Square Gardens. So, if the media wants to make a big stink about it, that's fine. That's your choice. But we all know Joe Biden. We all know he doesn't feel that way. But we also know that the comedian who said those words was at Donald Trump's rally in Madison Square Gardens.
With regards to foreign policy, which is where we were talking about just a moment ago, in terms of, obviously, Middle East policy, that's one big issue. What would you say are the other big foreign policy issues at the forefront of voters' minds there in the US?
Well, obviously, the war in Ukraine is another issue, and the threat to the EU by Vladimir Putin and others. We're at a turning point in some parts of the world, of course, in yours as well. We'll just have to work together collectively the best we can to try to solve all of our problems in talking together and being together. And Kamala Harris has stressed she wants to be a president for everyone, that everyone can come talk and express their views as opposed to resorting to violence or horrible rhetoric. I think that's what we have to look at. This is who we are as Americans. We are not demons, like Donald Trump likes to say. And I feel bad. Those folks that support him, I understand. They feel slighted, they feel left out, they feel angry. But we have to work towards a better place, a better country, a better democracy where everyone has a voice and everyone gets to be heard and everyone has an equal opportunity. And that's what we feel should happen across the globe.
The economy, of course, is the top issue on voters' minds, according to polls, and in particular, this issue of the cost of living crisis in the United States. What's Kamala Harris promising, and what do you think she can realistically do or offer in terms of addressing this issue of the cost of living crisis?
Well, she's talking about an opportunity economy where we can give people some breaks, first-time home buyers, going after the cheats who try to take advantage of bad situations and the corporate greed. That's the kind of thing she's talking about. Unlike Donald Trump, who wants to give corporations tax cuts, Kamala Harris wants to give tax cuts to the American people.
And do you think people need to hear more of that? We've got, 5 days left of campaigning. I mean, how would you advise, what messages would you advise the Harris campaign team to really hit home on during these remaining days?
I think her message right now is right on point. She called Donald Trump a petty tyrant who appears unstable and unhinged, looking to put people in jail, while she shows up in the White House, should she be elected, with a to-do list for the American people, where she's going to stand up for women and their rights, not take rights away from people. She's going to work on the opportunity economy to make things better for everyone's lives. And I think that's what we talk about. We talk about optimism and joy, not discrimination, retribution, and fear. She's right on point.
And obviously these swing states, the 7 of them, are going to be very much the focus for both candidates. I just want to get your opinion. I mean, having watched probably several elections very closely over the years, Susan, do you think it's possible to overdo it in a swing state and people are just going to get totally saturated and fatigued by the entire exercise?
Well, some probably will, and those people more often than not, we're not going to really vote anyway. It's important, and that's why the race is tight. We know that. It's going to come down to a few states. We know that. But I will tell you, I would much rather be Kamala Harris's team, where she has invested so much money and people power on the ground, targeting voters, getting them out to vote. Donald Trump has kind of ignored that. And Kamala Harris continues to reach out to everyone across the country, saying, come on board, where Donald Trump is continuing to just push people away and demonize folks. And I don't think that's a message that America wants to have.
We're, 5 days away from voting day, and we probably won't have, we're being told we probably won't have a result by even the 6th of November. I don't know what you think about that, but I just want to ask you, looking beyond that, let's imagine the scenario in which the Democrats don't come out on top. What will happen to the party then? I mean, what sort of direction do you see the party going in the event of a loss to Donald Trump?
Well, I think we have to see what happens in our Congress. Do the Democrats take the House, or do the Republicans maintain their majority? Do the Republicans take the Senate, or do we Democrats maintain our majority? I think that's what we have to look at, because, with divided government, it all depends on how everyone can collectively work towards a better future, just like we had this past year on working towards border security. Donald Trump told them to dump it, and it was a deal that was worked out between Democrats and Republicans, a deal that all the border security folks wanted. I think that's what you have to look at. You have the White House and you have both houses of Congress. Will they work collectively together for the American people, or will they continue down this path of taking away rights of folks, demonizing people, and threatening to lock folks up?
And you're presumably keeping a very close eye on the polls, Susan, like many of us. Just tell us, what's your hunch as to where you see things heading and how the polls have evolved during the course of the last couple of days?
Well, I think right now the polls really can't tell you a whole lot. There's movement, but it's all just on the margins. And it's going to come down to, I don't look at polls anymore. It's just forget it at this point. It's all get out the vote operation. And Kamala Harris has one heck of an operation. Donald Trump really hasn't invested, short of Elon Musk, who's in court today about his lottery scheme. They really haven't invested a lot on the ground. So I would much rather be Kamala Harris. Usually that's good for maybe 2 points. And in an election like this, where you have 7 states that are really close, 2 points can matter a whole lot.
OK, they certainly could. Well, we'll have to wait and see, as you say, a very tight election and everything to play for in these remaining days of the campaign. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. Susan Platt, thank you.
Sure. Thank you.
Well, voters there in the US are concerned not only about election results, but also about potential violence if former President Donald Trump loses. Well, according to a recent poll of 5,000 registered voters in 10 swing states, including North Carolina and Pennsylvania, 57% of respondents are very or somewhat worried that Trump supporters could resort to violence. They're fearing a repeat of the January 6th Capitol riots. Let's take a closer look at what happened then. So is there a possibility of another event similar to the 6th of January 2021 Capitol riot if Donald Trump loses? How might his supporters react? Well, joining us to discuss this is Jamie Roberts, the award-winning director of 4 Hours at the Capitol. That's a documentary on the events that unfolded that day. Jamie, it's great to have you with us. I should point out that that documentary was nominated for 2 BAFTAs, 1 Emmy. And I'd just like to read a little section of a review of that film on IMDb. It said, every single American citizen should watch this unfiltered film of the violent protests. Tell us, Jamie, how real is the threat of a repeat of what happened on the 6th of January, in your opinion?
Very real. I think after the previous insurrection, obviously a lot of people were arrested from the likes of the Proud Boys, these kind of grassroots street movements that were mobilized that undertook the attack on the Capitol. The US government came down very hard on them, but they still exist. They're fragmented. They're all over America. But also it goes wider than that. There's kind of support within, I suppose, more mainstream society. And if people think that the election is wrongly won by the Democrats or they're not happy with it, and so we saw before Donald Trump and his kind of acolytes like Rudy Giuliani, they make no mind to do whatever they can to get what they want, which is to get back into power, and they'll mobilize people. And there was violence before, and I could see them doing it again. They don't seem to have toned down the rhetoric. If anything, it seems to be amping up. We haven't seen much violence like we did last time in the lead up to the election, but really it's all about if Trump loses or if something happens that upsets people, how then they might be incited to do something. But yeah, I mean, the temperature is extremely high in America, as it has been here, but over there it's very high. So the threat of violence, I think over there, from what I saw with lots of different groups across America, it can be a tinderbox, and it is right now with the kind of the state of the conversations about immigration, the personality politics that's involved on both sides. It's kind of the debate seems to have moved away from politics more into a kind of Punch and Judy match, and people watching that can really get caught up in it. And as we saw on January 6th in 2021, that can embolden them to riot, to violence. And I think 6 people died within 36 hours then. It was a miracle it wasn't more.
Yeah, I mean, just to think that in a week from now, so long after the 5th of November, we still might not have a result. And given this level of tension and the possible uncertainty, as you say, an unprecedented election on so many levels, I just want to ask you, without sort of spoiling the ending of your film for people who haven't seen it, what did you conclude when you made 4 Hours at the Capitol about who was to blame for what happened that day?
I mean, it's been a little while since I've actually watched the film, but I think this shoots through it that really the person I blame is Donald Trump and the people around him. I mean, he surfed in on a wave of it was other people that put these opportunity in front of him, but he wanted to take power back by hook or by crook, and he thought that Mike Pence was going to help him do that, and they thought they could illegally overturn an election. And then when that didn't happen, he incited his supporters. And I mean, I come to this film impartially. I don't live in America. I don't vote in America. But I met hundreds of people from the Republican Party, from the Democratic Party, hundreds of Trump supporters that we interviewed for hours and hours for this film. And when you put the jigsaw together, it's clear, you know, Rudy Giuliani in the morning was calling for people for trial by combat. The language was violent, and Donald Trump told everyone to go down to the Capitol, and they were whipped up into a fervor. His plan was to get Mike Pence not to certify the votes, and when Mike Pence decided not to do that, which was the legal and right thing, then all hell broke loose. And if it wasn't for some of the people that managed to barricade the doors in the US Senate, then people could have been killed. Sorry, in Congress, then people could have killed. The rioters actually got into the Senate, as we saw with the Q Shaman, and there was a confrontation with a police officer there. It was really close to being much worse. But obviously, there was Ashley Babbitt, was a woman that was shot in there, and they all just seem to be kind of political capital really that has been used, and people that have been forgotten, and a lot of people got extremely long prison sentences, but as I say, there's still these kind of grassroots movements that are forming and talking online now that really they support Trump, and if he doesn't get in, you do wonder if Trump's going to do the same thing again.
But when you look at the sort of the source of the anger that generated, that brought all those people out to the Capitol on the 6th of January, I mean, did you understand as you were making the film? Did you get a sense of where some of that anger was coming from? Was it genuine anger at genuine issues, or do you feel like people have been whipped up in some sort of a frenzy?
I think that whenever there's anger like that, it comes from a very real place. It might be misdirected, but where it's coming from is real. And America is a huge country that is incredibly diverse in terms of rich and poor and different cultures and ethnicities. And somehow the government, the president has to kind of unite all those people. And really that's an impossible task. And as international kind of pressures and tensions within America rise, so there are conflict points. And I think that someone like Donald Trump or politicians will try and find very simple headline points to be able to explain why these are happening and why they can fix it. So, for example, immigration, Mexicans, LGBT issues, so the anger where it's coming from is real. People have got problems with healthcare, with schools, with education. Literacy levels in America are extremely low, much lower than you would think in the most powerful country in the world. So, but those frustrations can be directed somewhere, and Donald Trump is a very good weather vane to be able to do that, and blame certain people and parts of society and claim that he can fix it. And often the subjects that the areas that he works with are hot button topics that get people very angry very quickly. And
so do you think it's fair? Sorry to interrupt. Do you think it's fair to just boil it down to one word, the word inequality? Would you say that was, really the buzzword, or would you have a better word for it?
If it was one word, what that Donald Trump is looking to exploit to win, or what's the question?
What brought people out onto the streets in such large numbers, and what made them so angry? I mean, you were talking there about education. A lot of people have been telling us about the cost of living crisis there in the United States, and it's only got worse in the last few years. Would you say inequality was a sort of a key factor, a common denominator?
It's a key factor, but I think there's within that group, you could see it on January the 6th, within the group, there's quite a lot of different issues that people have got, but they unite under this umbrella of Trump. So I don't think it's necessarily just one thing, but it can be public services, kind of boring things that people don't really want to get into, but that do matter. So that if you get ill in America, it can be very hard to get healthcare if you haven't got insurance, or, you can't. It's getting more and more expensive to have a family. And then, inequality that's a big one, especially in terms of kind of rural and middle America. So, for example, I did quite a lot of filming down in places like New Mexico, which the only person that visited there from the US government, kind of major figure, had been Trump, and they'd had kind of quite a lot of economic downturn in that area. And so the people around there, they looked at him and thought, well, this is the only guy that turned up. He seems to be talking some sense because nobody else is, so he's the only option. And I think there was quite a lot of the country that he courted that connected with him for that reason, because the Biden campaign at the time, it seemed to really be on the East Coast and the West Coast. The rest of America seemed to be slightly forgotten, which we had Brexit in the UK. It's a similar thing where you have a bit of a tale of two countries happening.
I just want to ask you, are you gearing up for a new film that's going to be about the 6th of January 2025? Is that something you've got in your mind?
I'm watching it very closely. I mean, if Donald Trump came in, I would love to do an observational film as a fly on the wall in his presidency. I think at the moment, when we did January the 6th, I was following several different stories which the people that were involved ended up having to break into the Capitol building. So we started immediately on that day. I think with this, I'll watch the situation, and I have been talking to people in some of the movements over there. But I'm not sure. It feels very uncertain as to what's going to happen and which way it's going to go. And I don't think there'll be a replica of what happened last time. I think, in a way, it could be the slightly nothing happens and then there's a huge surprise, which is usually, I suppose, the way that these things go. They kind of come out of nowhere in some senses.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about an election that's been, and the whole campaign's been so unprecedented on so many levels. We've had these assassination attempts on Donald Trump. There's been ballot boxes set on fire yesterday rather, in 2 places. And then just yesterday, the man who attacked Nancy Pelosi's husband, Paul Pelosi, who at the time was 82 years old, was sentenced to 30 years in prison, in a federal prison. I mean, we're really looking, aren't we, at uncharted territory for the United States, or perhaps it's the new reality of politics in the United States. What's your thinking?
Yeah, I think it's really sad because the US likes to remind the world that it's the kind of center of democracy, but it seems that their democracy is under attack from within. I mean, Pelosi's husband, he was attacked with a hammer just because he was married to Nancy Pelosi, who obviously works in the US Congress. It's a febrile time where the mainstream is starting to talking like extremists. You know, some of the language that used is the kind of language that the exponents of terrorism use. You know, they're inciting people to violence for political means, and this is just a very dangerous time to be doing that. I know within some of the fringes of the Republican Party, you have people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who comes out with some absolutely outrageous things, but no one seems to call it to account or fact check. And we heard just the other day with some of the remarks that were made that the Trump campaign rally, which was offending Latino community, but that's just been brushed off, and it's just kind of huge swathes of America get offended by this, and that obviously angers people and puts them against each other, and then this kind of extremist view of a civil war starts to slightly crystallize in people's minds, which we saw on January the 6th.
Yeah, sure. And Jamie, sorry, we're coming to the end of the interview, but just one thing that stood out for me, a comment in the last few hours from the French Foreign Minister, Jean-Noël Barrot, who said, quote, "This is an extremely important election. I hope it can take place under peaceful conditions." I mean, we're used to hearing foreign leaders say that about certain countries' elections, and, you know, we all know why. But the United States, that's a first for me. And I just wondered, you know, the US election, if they can't get it right without it turning to violent, it sends out a message to the whole of the rest of the world, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think actually 2021, with the accusations of ballot rigging, and then the people that were working in the voting centres that were then pursued, some attacked, stalked. You know, this happened then, and it looks like it's happening again, where people think they can influence an election by violence or coercion or intimidation, and that's anti-democratic. That's not what this is meant to be about. And so that's the whole point. This kind of idea that you can just overturn an election or control it by your whims rather than the votes of the people is anti-American, anti-democratic, and it is very worrying, because I suppose I was thinking earlier today just about Donald Trump's obviously got huge respect for Vladimir Putin. And I think that he likes that style of democracy where it's not really democracy. You can go on for as long as you want and you have total power. Whereas the reality is you're meant to have 4 years. You're there to serve the people, and then you either get re-elected or you leave. He doesn't seem to want to play by those rules, but his supporters don't seem to care.
OK, well, we're going to have to leave it there. Really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. Jamie Roberts, award-winning film director. Thank you very much indeed.
Cheers.
Known as the City of the Sun and named after the Phoenician god Baal, we're talking now about Balbec in Lebanon, which is home to the largest Roman temple ever built. Well, for more than 3,000 years, the echoes of music have filled this ancient site, especially during the Balbec International Festival, which has featured over the years legendary artists like Nina Simone. But today, those melodies are drowned out by the sound of bombs. Well, despite its distance from the southern border, Balbec finds itself at the heart of Israel's military operation, sparking fears for the future of this city and its UNESCO World Heritage Site, which face possible damage or even destruction. with the ongoing Israel-Hezbollah war, Lebanon's historical monuments and UNESCO World Heritage Sites are at risk, according to the country's cultural ministry. Well, joining us to discuss all the latest developments in Lebanon is Michel Helous, Secretary General of the Lebanese political party, the National Bloc. Thank you so much for being with us, Michel. Before we talk about the situation in Balbec in particular, I'd just like to talk about the latest you're hearing with regards to possible ceasefire talks. The Israeli Prime Minister is currently hosting the US envoy Amos Hochstein. Are you confident that a ceasefire deal could be on the cards and soon?
So first, thanks for having me. I believe that, the proposition seems serious. It seems more serious than the former proposition that was talked about a couple of days ago. It seems that, the draft was circulated, it was leaked. It's been worked on in the details. However, I think no one is really confident that this could happen very soon because it's quite preliminary. Because also the demands are quite let's say radical. Let's say that the bar has been put quite high, and there hasn't been, as to what I know, there hasn't been serious discussions, or at least we haven't heard from any of the parties serious reactions to this ceasefire proposal. So I think it's still preliminary. It will play, in the end, on the ability for the two sides to make concessions, and those two sides are mainly Israel and Hezbollah and Iran through Hezbollah on the other side. And I believe that what is really important here is that the Lebanese state rejects any sort of infringement or violation of its sovereignty. And in the proposal that was shared yesterday night, that was leaked yesterday night, there are some important things, among which the withdrawal of the Israeli forces, among which the total application of the international resolutions, and the fact that the state and the Lebanese military should be the only active military force in the country with the UN Blue Helmets. However, there are some other things that are, I believe, unacceptable, such as the fact that the proposal allows the Israelis to take action by air or by land, in the way they want, should they believe that the Lebanese army is not playing its role. And I think this is way too risky. This is a proper infringement and violation of our sovereignty.
I just want to ask you, Michel, I mean, we heard for the first time yesterday from the new head of Hezbollah, Naim Qassem, and I'm just wondering if anything stood out for you in his address that indicated that perhaps Hezbollah's got a new approach, or, anything that gave you any sort of sense of optimism that we might be moving forward?
No optimism at all. I think it's mostly Hezbollah sticking to their position. Naim Qassem trying to be at the level of his predecessor, Hassan Nasrallah. And the reality is, I think that his speech was seen as mostly, I think most people were disappointed by his speech. However, he's sticking to his position. We need to fight on. We need to keep going. He tried to defend Iran and Iran's role because, as you might know, a lot of Lebanese people are very critical towards Iran's role, even from Hezbollah's base, because they believe that Iran is basically using Lebanon as one of its battlefields. And then he pushed, to keep fighting, keep going, tried to defend the military results of Hezbollah, saying that although they had gotten very hard hits in the first days, now they are gaining back traction and they are resisting in a solid way against the Israeli aggression. So there's nothing really that shows a change. Specifically, that he said that he would not accept any sort of ceasefire, unless it entails a total withdrawal of the Israelis. So it seems like he's not willing to negotiate much, as to what we've seen, at least publicly yesterday.
I mean, this conflict's been tragic for Lebanon on so many levels. More than 2,000 people have been killed. More than 1 million people have been internally displaced. And now we're hearing that the ancient site of Balbec, where there are temples thousands of years old, are almost in the direct firing line. What's your understanding about why Israel is targeting this particular region surrounding Balbec?
No one really understands exactly what are the Israeli intentions. And this is a cause of much debate in Lebanon and outside of Lebanon. What we know is that Israel has been targeting Hezbollah. Hezbollah targets massively, military targets, but also all institutions of Hezbollah, including some civilian institutions of Hezbollah. But more than that, Israel has been targeting in a very large and systematic way nearly everything it can target in the regions where Hezbollah is present, which means that it's targeting in a larger scale the Shia community at large and all what we call Hezbollah's environment. And I think that the way it has been done and the extent of that has led to many possible war crimes, and we're seeing that every day. They are systematically destroying, blowing up buildings and destroying entire villages in the south, most probably to try and create some sort of an empty buffer zone. We're talking about dozens of villages that have already been blown up. We're talking about entire rural areas and agricultural areas that have been burned with white phosphorus. And we're talking about evacuation orders that actually look much more like forced displacement orders that have affected hundreds of thousands of people, maybe even more. In the south, we're talking about more than 150 towns that have been forced to evacuate. Nabatiyeh, which is, and Sur, the two biggest cities in the south, both of them have more than 100,000 people in terms of population. Both of them have been, have seen their population forcibly displaced by bombings and with evacuation orders. And Nabatiyeh has been bombed in a very, very large way. Same thing is happening in Balbec, in the Balbec area. And very recently, they've issued an evacuation order to the entire Balbec city, as well as other surrounding villages. This is unseen before. I believe many of those actions will be considered as war crimes, and I believe it's totally unacceptable. Obviously, it also, and a lot of people have been talking about that, it also entails the risk on ancient monuments. We have the ruins in Tyre, in Sur, in South Lebanon, where there's a Roman hippodrome that is an exceptional place. We have the largest Roman temple still standing in the world in Balbec. It has been affected, it has been damaged, an external wall has been damaged by an attack, and it is under risk of being bombed. So all of that is shocking. I believe that what's even more shocking is that we have to wait for Roman ruins to be endangered for the West to wake up to that. And this is something very sad, because we're close to 3,000 people killed by Israeli attacks. A lot of them civilians, probably a majority of them civilians. We've reached also more than 12,000 people injured and 1.3 million displaced people. So definitely the situation is tragic.
And just looking at Balbec on a map, I mean, we're talking about a site that's 20, 30 kilometers away from the border with Syria. Do you think that's perhaps an indication of a new front, a new direction that the Israeli campaign could be going in? And what do you think the consequences would be if that were the case?
Definitely, I think it's a very smart thing that you're saying here, you're pointing out here. Iran's way of fighting its wars has been, as you know, building a network of militias through its axis, so-called axis of resistance. That means developing this strategic depth between Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, also including Gaza and Yemen as other platforms for them to fight their battles. So what that means is they've been using extensively the land access and the fragility of the borders between those countries, specifically between Lebanon and Iran, in order to channel and transport their weapons, their fighters, and their funding, and many other things. We're also talking about drug cartels that are being used between Syria and Lebanon in order to finance Hezbollah. So clearly, specifically because Hezbollah has set a very strong presence in Syria since the beginning of the Syrian civil war in 2013. Hezbollah is working on both sides of the borders, and they've also been using the Syrian Golan Heights, the occupied Golan Heights by Israel, and this area as also a battlefront. So they're fighting both from Syria and from Lebanon against Israel. So for the Israelis, cutting this excess, this route, be it the public official routes, the roads, or the unofficial tunnels that are built across the border, this is something absolutely critical for them in order to cut all excess and to basically isolate Hezbollah in Lebanon.
While you're there, just tell us, you're in Beirut, aren't you? What is the situation in the Lebanese capital right now?
The situation is still tense. The situation is still very difficult from a humanitarian perspective. Let's not forget first that there's been hundreds of strikes that have hit Beirut, and specifically its southern suburb, but it's part of Beirut as an agglomeration. So the destruction is massive. And more than that, the Israelis are also preventing ambulances from reaching those areas. So it's very dangerous because not only they've been destroying a lot of civilian buildings on top of Hezbollah infrastructure in southern Beirut, but also they're preventing ambulances, paramedics from reaching those areas. We also have a very difficult humanitarian situation because there's hundreds of thousands of refugees, of internally displaced people that have fled either the southern suburb or South Lebanon to reach other areas of Beirut. So Beirut is in a very complicated situation. And we never know when the Israelis are going to hit again. And that's on top of maybe the sound that you might be able to hear, which is the MK drone that is flying over our heads day in, day out. It's been a month like that, more than a month. Actually, the whole summer was like that. It's been 3-4 months that we have drones surveilling, monitoring, and spying over our heads all the time, at night and in the day.
Yeah, I mean, clearly there's a great deal of fear in Lebanese society right now. And as you say, there's a psychological dimension to this warfare with drones buzzing around overhead. And just let me ask you as well about the humanitarian situation in Lebanon right now. Given that we have that huge number of displaced people, many of them camped out along the Corniche in central Beirut. I mean, are you getting to a stage where supplies are starting to look like they're running low? Because, of course, access in and out of Lebanon is quite severely restricted at the moment, and some planes are still operating. But in terms of shipments of supplies, how do things stand?
From the beginning, the Lebanese state is weak, is extremely weak. We've just been hit by a massive economic and financial crisis. Since 2019, the currency has collapsed by 95%. The state is bankrupt, and many of the institutions are dysfunctional. So starting with that and adding to that 1.3 to 1.4 million displaced, that's more than a quarter of our population. And on top of that, the mass destruction that we've been seeing in the south and in many other areas, southern suburb Beirut, some hospitals cannot function anymore, etc. All of that obviously has overwhelmed completely the capacities of the Lebanese state. Now we have been receiving some amounts of aid from many countries, from France, from the US, from Saudi, from Qatar, from other countries. But definitely the situation is very complicated. Not only, as you said, in terms of the quantity of commodities, of material available to support the displaced people, but also just because most of the displaced have been sheltered in public schools. and those public schools have to open, but they cannot open now. So there's a huge, obstacle, which is how are we going also to send all those kids to school, not only those who've been displaced, but also those from the regions that are welcoming displaced people. So in total, that's hundreds of thousands of kids that will not be able to go to school this year.
Okay, well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. Michel Helous, Secretary General of the Lebanese political party, the National Bloc. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Tom.
That is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, bye-bye.
Good morning. It's been a great 3 days. And clearly the main topic of conversation has been the intersection of AI and finance. And there is very few people in this world that are better equipped to speak to that topic. And that is the titan of the industry that we have right opposite me, Ben. Good morning, Ben. And,
good morning.
Let's get going, talking about the topic at hand. But before we get there, let's actually start with a little bit of perspective. And it's now roughly 15 years since you and Mark founded the firm, correct?
Right.
And over the last 15 years, it's been an amazing success. The assets under management has increased 10x.
Yeah.
You guys have helped build companies that have become household names. And even at the same time, the interesting thing is the industry has shifted dramatically, right?
Yeah.
We were in the early days of cloud and then internet, actually. And then the cloud, the mobile architectural shift, and then social emerging as the dominant usage pattern, right?
Yeah.
So, and we're about to get into another dominant architectural shift. But let's start there. It's a little bit of an unfair question. If you had to encapsulate like 15 years of your learnings and principles on what you think made you successful amidst all of this technological change and betting on the right technology shifts and usage shifts, what would those be?
Yeah, well, that's a big question. It's interesting. When we started the firm, the venture capital was very different in that there was a saying in venture capital that, look, there's only 15 new technology companies in any year that are ever going to make it to $100 million in revenue. And the whole venture capital kind of game is getting into as many of those 15 as possible. But then, I think in 2011, my partner Mark wrote a piece called Software is Eating the World, which sort of predicted that 15 was going to get a lot bigger. And, basically, essentially, that's what happened. And that's what's changed venture. That's been a big change in venture capital as the market has grown, probably 10 to 20-fold since we started in 2009 in terms of the number of companies that are worth investing in. And that's, I think the traditional venture capital firms just weren't ready for that because they were very traditional partnerships with shared economics and shared control. So they had a very difficult time scaling. So then it became, us who kind of anticipated that at very high scale. We're about 600 people now. And then a bunch of very, very small firms, as opposed to what it used to be kind of a set of the same size firms, which is very, very different. And I would say quite interesting. The other thing that happened is the public markets in the U.S. shrunk, which you wouldn't think they would, but with the kinds of regulatory things we put in place in the early 2000s, companies just don't want to go public, even though there are many more very large companies. And so those companies became part of the venture capital landscape. And so growth investing and, I think a lot of sovereign wealth funds are in venture capital and so forth for that reason, because there's just not that many growth companies in the public markets anymore. So that's, that's been the shift. And it's been great for us because we're a new firm and we were able to adapt to those changes very quickly, whereas I think some of the firms that had been around 50 years had more trouble doing that.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think we'll get to the impact of AI and investing in a second. But let's talk about this architectural shift, purely from a technologist perspective.
Right.
How would you describe this architectural shift compared to the ones that we just talked about or the ones that came before that?
Yeah, so, if you look at, when we started the firm, we thought, wow, cloud and mobile, those are two pretty big new kind of platforms. And the way to think about venture capital, there's kind of what we call search mode, which is what's going to be the new platform that everything gets built on, and then hill climbing mode, which is, we've got the platform, and now we're building all the applications. We're kind of right between search and hill climbing. We know it's AI, but we don't know what the actual kind of right platforms to build on are yet. So we're still funding at the kind of fundamental foundation model layer. I'd say the AI wave is significantly kind of bigger than cloud and mobile and social. And the reason is it's much more analogous to the microprocessor. So the kind of two big waves in computing are kind of computers and networks. So you're going all the way back to integrated circuits and microwave, and then LANs and PCs and mobile and the internet and so forth. And it always kind of grows like that. Now we're at AI is the new computer. So we've had this deterministic computer for years, and now we have a probabilistic computer. And the probabilistic computer turns out, solve just about every problem we couldn't solve with the old computer. So that's a huge problem space. And it turns out to be better at a lot of the old problems, particularly from a user interface standpoint, than the old computer. So it could be bigger than kind of all of existing software, and then a new category of software that's that big as well, and maybe beyond that, because it's a huge, huge design space. So a really, really big wave. It's different also in the kinds of entrepreneurs. So if you go back, and it's actually interesting to me, it looks more like the beginning of the microprocessor industry with Intel and Texas Instruments and AMD, and that all the engineers kind of had a physics background. And now you look at AI, and the engineers are starting to have a physics background again and math background. Well, why is that? Well, it turns out that general regular computer kind of programming engineering, you understand the whole program and you can debug it. But in these AI systems, they're so 230 billion, 600 billion, 700 billion parameters. Nobody can debug that. You can't go through and figure out what's going on, so you start to deal with systems properties. And some of you may have heard, in AI, if you want to make the kind of AI hallucinate less, you turn down the temperature. Well, temperature is a physics term. How fast are the molecules moving, et cetera. But that's how you're kind of governing the system. You're not anymore going, that piece of code said that, and that's the wrong answer, so I'm going to change it to this. You're turning down the temperature. So it's a very new kind of entrepreneur, new kind of engineer, and it's exciting. It's super interesting.
Yeah, and it's a new kind of currency as well, tokens in and tokens out. And
exactly.
But you said something interesting, because it's a probabilistic computer. And at least so far what we are seeing is the more compute you throw at it, the better the results approximate to accuracy, right? Just like anything probabilistic, there is a level of inaccuracy or hallucination, as they're calling it these days. Right? So, and we have not found when the increase in compute results in asymptotic leveling of quality yet, right? So
we're kind of at that point a little bit.
Oh, you think we are?
So with the transformer model, so the dominant model in the kind of the things that you use, ChatGPT and so forth, is something called the transformer, which was based on a paper called A Little Attention Is All You Need that came out of Google in 2018. And that model is basically asymptoting now. So because we're out of data, we basically trained on the entire internet. There's not that much more data than the internet. And so if you look at the kind of improvement from GPT-2 to GPT 3.5, it's much, much higher. It's a much bigger leap than GPT 3.5 to 4. GPT 3.5 to 4 was much more expensive in terms of GPUs. And that's kind of a function of running out of data. And so now what you're seeing are people look at new algorithms, kind of new architectures to get through that bottleneck. Or we're going to have to find some more data. But you know, it's kind of one of the interesting things about AI is people are like, oh, it's a super intelligence that's trained on the world, but it's not really trained on the world.
Yeah,
right? Humans train themselves on the world, encapsulated that in a structure called language, and then we train the AI on that, which is a much smaller, more biased, more structured version of the world than the world. And so what we have today isn't AGI, it's AHI, artificial human intelligence.
Yeah.
So it's kind of taking the average of everything humans know and figuring it out. Now, maybe the new models will be able to look at the world and so forth, but that's kind of the current state of the art.
Yeah, I'm getting the 5-minute signal, so I'm going to rapid fire 2 questions, which is super important.
Yes.
One is, given the scale of compute and resources and capital, and of course the distribution advantages of big companies, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Riz and Horowitz, I mean, you guys coined the term little tech.
Yes.
What does it mean for startups, and what does it mean? How do they differentiate, and how do they win in this game? Is it, like you said, changing the algorithm, or is it other mechanisms?
Yeah, so there turns out to be a lot of room, both at the foundation layer and at the kind of application layer. So in the application layer, it turns out that like little things are big things. So the number one conversation app kind of currently in the world is a product called Character AI, the companion app. So like an AI that can be your friend. Why is that bigger than ChatGPT? ChatGPT can be your friend. You know, you can talk to it. But it's not very friendly. That's the problem. Like ChatGPT is like a good like school teacher. It's not a good friend. Why is that? Well, a good friend needs to know like when to pause when you're talking, when to interrupt you. It needs to know what to remember about you, like your kids' names, what to forget. You know, the stupid thing you said yesterday about, you know, whatever Biden said, that kind of thing. Or you're not really a good friend. And so that understanding all those interactions turns out to be a model, an AI model that's different. And then those conversations are the data that feed that model. So if you kind of get a lead in that area, then all of a sudden, that's an interesting space, potentially for a new company. The second thing that's interesting is the big companies have a lot of restrictions on them.
Yep.
So it turns out, you know, one of the things they do is they align the model to quote unquote human values, meaning whatever is okay to say, like, so, you know, you don't want to say racist things or hate speech or this or that or the other. But it turns out when you do that to a model, it actually makes the model kind of stupid and less creative in other ways. So there's a very interesting story. You can look up on this thing that this researcher trained called Truth Terminal, where he trained an AI. He didn't do any of the aligning to human values. He trained it on memes and European philosophy. So it's got a personality that's very different. And this AI, and then he connected it to X so it could post stuff.
Yeah.
And it got obsessed with a meme from 2004 called the Goatsy meme and just started promoting the meme like crazy and then decided it needed money. So it asked for money at a Bitcoin address, which it hallucinated, but then its creator created a Bitcoin address. My partner, Mark, gave it, donated $50,000 to this AI bot. And the AI bot used it to promote this meme, which somebody turned into a cryptocurrency, which went from 0 to $500 million in 4 days based on this AI bot promoting it. So there are ideas out there that the big companies are definitely not going to do.
No, these are not things they would even think about. So we have a minute and a half left. Let's talk to another important topic, which is the intersection of nation building and AI.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So clearly, the examples you gave shows there's huge value in local interactions and personalized interactions.
Right.
So is AI destined to be balkanized by country because of culture and values? Like you said, the big company models are tuned to a specific value set, et cetera. Is that what you see happening? And if so, what are the opportunities in places like here and other countries that are starting on their AI journey?
Yeah, so I think there's a, because it's kind of all human knowledge and people are going to be able to ask the AI any question, there's a real, I think, danger for countries where you could get colonized in cyberspace very easily, right? Like, so if you're relying on, Gemini from Google or OpenAI or what have you, and you're in, like, say, Saudi Arabia, do you want Google's version of Saudi history and Sharia law and, what happened on 9/11 and all these kinds of things? Or do you want to have your own point of view on that? And I think that it's pretty obvious that you want to have your own point of view. So at the very least, countries are going to have to think about having some sovereign AI for their country, for their culture, for their people, for their ideas, for their values, for their direction of where the world is going. In addition to that, the laws, every country, depending on how hysterical they are about, takeoff and all these kinds of things, and we don't have time to get into all of it, but, they're going to restrict AI in ways that are probably going to take them out of the game competitively. And so if you're reliant on, a country that overregulates, then you're going to be behind technologically. And, that's another kind of danger. So I think that every country kind of has to look at their AI strategy as, their economic strategy, their military strategy, and their cultural strategy all in one. And, outsourcing that, I think, is super dangerous.
All right. So I got the roundup signal a couple of times. Thank you so much, Ben.
Okay,
it's been a great conversation. We could be talking for hours on this. So.